Chapter 285. As You Wish. The guide's eyes were like those of a dead fish. She was probably angered by Gohan. She extended a hand in front of Gohan and said, "Come, give it to me." "What is it?" Gohan frowned. What was wrong with this guide? Was she openly asking for a bribe? "Of course it's the hero coin. Lord Gohan, don't tell me you want to synchronize the heavenly sword without knowing anything." The guide smiled disdainfully. "Lord, it seems like you don't know that a top innate sword lady like Heavenly Sword, who is ranked in the top 500, can't be synchronized just because she wants to. If you want to synchronize with Lady Heavenly Reliance, Lord Gohan, you'll have to give Sword Tower 10,000 hero coins. If you don't have them, you'll have to choose another option. Not everyone can synchronize with Lady Heavenly Reliance," the guide said in a strange tone. Only then did Gohan remember that Sword Pavilion did have such a rule. Because synchronizing with Heavenly Sword Lady would consume a certain amount of origin energy, Sword Pavilion strictly controlled the number of times they could synchronize with Heavenly Sword Lady and set a limit of 3 times a day. There was also a rule that stated that Sword Pavilion had to hand over a sufficient amount of hero coins to conduct a synchronization experiment with a top-class sword maiden. This was to put an end to the ancient sword tier swordbearers who thought that they should just test Heavenly Sword's synchronization experiment with Heavenly Sword. Sword Pavilion naturally didn't care about normal RMB. Only hero coins could catch their attention. According to the ranking of the innate sword lady, the price of synchronizing with them was naturally different. For example, the top Heavenly Sword Lady required 10,000 hero coins. Gohan had only earned a little over 50 hero coins after completing 5 quests in the Miling Mountain range with his life on the line. A normal ancient sword wielder would need around 3 to 4 years to save up such a huge sum of money if they fought for 250 hero coins a month. With such a huge amount of time, every ancient sword wielder who wanted to experiment with Heavenly Sword Lady would have to carefully weigh their own worth. Was it worth it to spend such a huge amount of money for a hope that wouldn't appear in the next 350 years? However, reducing Goddess Yi's energy consumption was only the official reason. According to some conspiracy theorists, the synchronization of the Sword Maiden did not require any energy at all. The reason why the game developers wanted to collect so many hero coins was because the number of hero coins released far exceeded the number of hero coins collected. In order to prevent the inflation of hero coins, they used this channel to collect hero coins. Lord Gohan, if you haven't prepared the hero coin by today, then please come back here after you have. The guide was also a bad person. He didn't remind Gohan about the hero coin in the beginning. Now that he was here, he suddenly asked Gohan for the hero coin. It was obvious that he was waiting to see Gohan make a fool of himself. Sigh, this world is really malicious. Even a random small character wants to provoke Gohan. "I don't have a hero coin," Gohan replied calmly. The guide looked as if she had already guessed that Gohan didn't have one. She smiled from the bottom of her heart since she met Gohan. "Don't worry, Lord Gohan. I can even show you around the other sword maidens. As long as the sword maidens are ranked below 500, they don't accept hero coins. I don't need those sword maidens. I only want the Heavenly Sword." Gohan's dry words made the guide a little angry. She didn't even want to smile anymore. She looked at Gohan with disdain. "Lord, if you have a hero coin, just give it to me. Don't make things difficult for people like us who rely on our salaries. As long as you take out the hero coin, you can touch Goddess Yi." "I said, I don't have a hero coin," Gohan said seriously. "I never lie. If I say I don't have one, I don't have one. Then please leave, Lord. Otherwise, I'll have to call the guards of the Sword Garret to receive Lord Gohan." The guards of the Sword Garret that the guide mentioned were the sword bearers in charge of guarding the Sword Garret. According to the rules, the Sword Garret needed at least 1 immortal sword bearer, 3 spiritual sword bearers, 50 famed sword bearers, and more than 100 sword and ancient sword bearers to provide comprehensive protection. I have a question. Guhan walked to the counter of the heavenly sword. I only need to touch the synchronization. Are you sure the guards of the sword garret will be able to get here before I touch the heavenly sword? You dare. The guide's expression changed. She had worked here for more than 10 years. She had never seen a sword bearer like Guhan trying to forcefully synchronize with the sword maidens. Guards. Sword garret guards. Worker 154 is calling the guards. Someone is forcefully synchronizing with the heavenly sword. Someone is forcefully synchronizing with the heavenly sword. Please come and stop him. The guards reacted quickly. After receiving the guide's report, the first wave of sword bearers arrived at the heavenly sword's location in less than 10 seconds. However, they were still too late. They looked at the scene in front of them in confusion, not knowing what to do. What do we do, boss? The first 2 sword bearers to arrive were of the ancient sword rank and the treasured sword rank. The ancient sword rank sword bearer asked his leader, the treasured sword rank sword bearer, blankly. The treasured sword rank sword bearer did not know how to answer. What's wrong? What happened? What are you 2 doing here? Go and capture him. At this moment, a famed sword rank guard rushed over and anxiously ordered the first 2 sword bearers to capture him. As a result, the treasured sword rank team leader immediately ran to the famed sword rank's side as if he had been granted amnesty. With a bitter face, he said, "Master, you're here. What do you think we should do?" Of course. The famed sword rank sword bearer wanted to say capture him, but when he saw what was happening in the hall, he was instantly dumbfounded. He could not bring himself to say the word capture. In the end, he could only take out his personal terminal and call his leader. As a result, the 2 spirit sword rank sword bearers rushed over. When they saw the scene in front of them, they were also dumbfounded and could not believe their eyes. However, they were spirit sword rank sword bearers and belonged to the upper echelons of the sword garret. They had considerable autonomy and could not ask Pavilion Master Lu Lei for help. The 2 spirit sword rank sword bearers looked at each other and said, "What are you panicking for? Haven't you seen synchronization before?" The 2 leaders first reprimanded the rest of the sword bearers and then immediately ordered, "Surround the city and protect this person. Absolutely do not allow anyone to touch his body." Who's that? What's going on? Why is there such a big commotion? Why do we have to coordinate with this comrade? Who's his guide? Come out and answer my questions, the spirit sword rank sword bearer shouted. Thus, Gohan's guide walked out trembling with fear. She did not expect things to turn out like this. Tell me, what's going on? Tell me everything. The spirit sword rank sword bearer stared at Gohan's guide with a serious and terrifying expression. At the same time, because of such a huge commotion, all the guides and a few ancient sword rank sword bearers on the 2nd floor gathered around to watch the show. I don't know either. Gohan's guide had a bitter look on her face. He said he wanted to coordinate with Lady E, so I brought him here. I asked him for a hero coin, but he refused to give it to me. He said he didn't have any. I asked him to leave and leave this place. In the end, he didn't listen and said he wanted to forcefully coordinate with him. I'm just an ordinary person, so how could I stop him? I could only call you guys. You mean to say that this person didn't pay and forcefully held onto Heavenly Sword and began to coordinate with him? After hearing the guide's words, the spirit sword rank sword bearer had a strange look on his face. He suddenly didn't know how to deal with this guy. Logically speaking, this kind of person who didn't follow the rules and forcefully coordinated with him should be sent to the disciplinary committee and locked up for a year or 2 to let him know that rules were meant to be followed. In particular, the rules of Sword Pavilion required him to pay a terrible price. However, the method mentioned above was a punishment that would be carried out when the other party's synchronization and coordination failed. When the synchronization and coordination of the solid and cold was successful, the person would turn into a petrified state and begin to nurture the heavenly sword. This was a completely different matter. Were they going to lock up a heavenly sword wielder who had never appeared in 350 years in prison for 1 or 2 years? This was a complete waste of heavenly sword's fighting strength and also a complete joke for Yanjing City. After thinking about it again and again, the spirit sword rank sword bearer made a wise decision. Everyone, stay here and protect him. I'm going to report to the pavilion master and let him deal with this matter. Sure enough, when faced with this kind of thing that one couldn't decide or didn't know how to decide, people's instinct was to push the blame to the person above them. Thereupon, a funny thing happened. These sword-bearers who originally came to capture Gohan instantly changed their identity and became Gohan's protectors. They surrounded the entire Hall of Heavenly Sword, not allowing anyone to approach. Although the sword-wielding guards tried their best to cover up the scene in the hall, anyone with a bit of brains and good eyesight would be able to catch a glimpse of a stone-like figure standing alone in the Hall of the Heaven-Reliant Sword. At the same time, his belly seemed to be gradually getting bigger. Yuchang's sword had long been synchronized with Non-Phase sword, except for the people of Sword Pavilion. Most people didn't know the news of Yuchang's sword's disappearance. It was said that Tianwen's sword was also taken away by a new sword bearer a few days ago. As a result, it wasn't difficult for the remaining people to guess that the synchronized sword was the only one left in the hall, Heavenly Sword. In almost 10 minutes, the news about the Heavenly Sword, which hadn't awakened for 350 years, being synchronized with the first sword of Sword Maiden, Heavenly Sword, spread throughout Yuzhong City and then to Yanjing City, London City, and other base cities. Simply put, Gohan was about to become famous in the real world. Chapter 286. A few minutes later, Lu Lei, who was playing an indescribable game called Pulling Radish with his Sword Maiden, hurried over to the hall. After receiving the news that the synchronization of the Heavenly Sword was successful, he had no choice but to put down what he was doing and come here to deal with these trivial matters. You two, you're getting more and more backward. Do you need this old man's old bones to personally deal with such a small matter? Can't you make your own decisions? When Lu Lei saw them, he immediately lectured the 2 spirit sword-grade sword-bearers. These 2 spirit sword-bearers, who were usually under a few people and enjoyed all kinds of respect, lowered their heads and let Lu Lei scold them. There was nothing they could do. The other party's ability was higher than theirs, and they were also older than them, so they could only accept it. Tisk, if you think we can handle it, why did you come here in person? You could have just stayed at home and given full authority to the 2 of us. The 2 spirit sword bearers thought to themselves, but their faces became more and more ashamed. All right, this matter can't be blamed on you. This old man has lived for so long, and I've never encountered such a thing. Lu Lei was satisfied with his scolding, so he gave these 2 unlucky guys a way out. This is the guy who forcefully synchronized with the Heavenly Sword. He's got guts to bully our Sword Pavilion. Just watch, even if he synchronized with the Heavenly Sword, I'll make him reflect for a few months in the disciplinary committee. I'll tell everyone that the rules of our Sword Pavilion can't be violated by just anyone. If you commit a crime, you have to pay the price. Old man Lu Lei ruthlessly reprimanded Gohan. Unfortunately, Gohan was like a rock at this time, so he couldn't hear Lu Lei's scolding at all. Oh, this belly looks like it's almost 8 months pregnant. It'll be born in a minute or so. According to the rules, when a sword bearer synchronized, unless it was an emergency, no one was allowed to get within 5 meters of their body to avoid dangerous situations. However, old man Lu Lei didn't care about this at all. He casually walked to Gohan's side and very wretchedly touched Gohan's belly. He came to the conclusion that Gohan was nearly 8 months pregnant. Why does this kid look so familiar? Heavenly Sword Immortal Lu Lei glanced at Gohan, and he couldn't take his eyes off him. Why does this guy look so familiar? I feel like I've seen him somewhere before. Hey, let me ask you, "What's the name of this sword wielder?" Lu Lei looked at the guide beside him. As soon as the guide heard Lu Lei's question, he tensed up as if there was a spring in his body. "Pavilion Master, this sword wielder is called Gohan. He is an ancient sword wielder, and this is his first time coming to the second floor to synchronize sword." The guide blurted out everything he knew. "Gohan, it's really him." When he heard Gohan's name, Lu Lei's memories immediately resurfaced. After all, this had happened less than a month ago. Lu Lei remembered that this kid had followed him into the sword burial grounds with Liuyan Ling. Not only had he obtained the ancient sword Maiden Qinpin sword, which he had never heard of before, but he had also saved Liuyan Ling's life and gained the friendship of the Liuyan family. Lu Lei had thought that Gohan was a very lucky person to have saved Liuyan Ling's life and gained the favor of the Liuyan family. He hadn't expected that this guy's luck was not just a little bit. He had actually synchronized with the heaven-reliant sword, which had not moved for 350 years. This guy's luck was probably off the charts. No, wait, this child became an ancient sword wielder a month ago. This thought suddenly flashed through Lu Lei's mind. This time, he was even more surprised. It was not that there were no sword wielder who could advance from ancient sword to treasured sword in a month. In fact, it was not even considered rare. The children of the aristocratic families usually needed half a month to 20 days to reach the standard of 1,000 quarks to become a treasured sword wielder. Even Liuyan Ling had advanced from an ancient sword to a treasured sword in a mere 3 days. However, these fast people were all children of aristocratic families. Not only did they have a bloodline that allowed them to synchronize easily with the Sword Maiden, but they also had a large amount of resources from their families. They had been nurtured by their retainers since they were young, and they had begun all kinds of sword wielder combat training. This was why they were able to advance so quickly. However, Gohan was different. Lu Lei took a look at Gohan's information after that. He was a standard commoner's son, a phoenix boy, and an orphan whose parents had passed away. Although children who grew up in such an environment had good willpower, their hardware was terrible. Without half a year to a year, it was impossible for them to accumulate a treasured sword. Not to mention anything else, just not running away in fear when fighting with Yuan Ko for the first time was already a very good person. However, this Gohan could accomplish all of this in a month. What did this mean? It meant that not only was Gohan strong-willed, but he was also very talented. He was good at commanding his sword maiden to fight. This was because if he wanted to reach 1,000 quarks of sword essence in a month, he would have to go through a lot of battles. If he fought with the Moustier Yuan Ko, then he would need about 500 battles to reach 1,000 quarks. This was equivalent to killing 18 Moustier Yuan Ko every day. This was simply impossible. Therefore, this little guy Gohan would definitely fight with the Tiger Tier Yuan Ko. In this case, he would only need about 100 battles to achieve his goal, killing an average of 3 to 4 Yuan Ko every day. However, it was impossible for Gohan to fight for the entire month. At least half of his time would be spent on preparation and learning. Putting everything else aside, Yuzhong University alone would never allow a new swordsman to leave the city to fight with Yuan Ko and seize the sword essence before completing basic combat training. Therefore, during the days when Gohan was actually fighting, he would have to kill 7 or 8 Tiger Tier Yuan Ko every day in order to accumulate 1,000 quarks of sword essence. However, could this little guy named Gohan really do this? With the help of his Qinpin, which was originally used by Kenzu's grandmother to dance in the square, how could he do something as heaven-defying as killing 7 or 8 Tiger Tier Yuan Ko every day? What kind of joke was this? Not even the Yixian sword could do this. Thinking of the Yixian sword, Lu Lei immediately thought of Liuyan Ling. At the same time, he also thought of the sword skill duel between Gohan and the Yixian, and how he had saved Liuyan Ling from the hands of the Yixian. At that time, Lu Lei had jokingly pushed Gohan over to take the bullet for Liuyan Ling, creating a chance for Gohan to save the damsel in distress. However, in reality, Lu Lei had just been talking about youth craziness and wanted to find some fun for himself. At that time, Lu Lei had already thought it through. If Liuyan Ling was really in danger, he would definitely save her. It was impossible that an immortal sword wielder could not save someone from an ancient sword wielder, right? However, later on, Lu Lei realized that the script did not play out according to his expectations. Gohan had actually saved Liuyan Ling, and the speed at which Gohan had learned the 5 fleeting times had truly shocked Lu Lei. At that time, Lu Lei had a very deep impression of Gohan's talent. In summary, Lu Lei judged that Gohan was a person with an extremely strong will who could withstand high-intensity battles day after day. At the same time, Gohan was extremely talented, and could even become a genius sword master. Towards such a genius, Lu Lei's thoughts gradually changed. He had originally planned to wait for Gohan to complete his synchronization before sending him to the discipline committee. However, Lu Lei decided to observe him for a while longer. When Lu Lei went through these thoughts in his head, Gohan's belly, which had not moved all this time, began to glow. Everyone present knew very well that Lady Heavenly Sword was about to be born from Gohan's purple palace. Indeed, very soon, a baby floated out of Gohan's purple palace. Then, in a second, it completed its growth and turned into a heroine in her 20s. She wore a calabash headdress on her head, and she appeared lazily in front of everyone. "Ah, I haven't seen sunlight in a long time." The first thing Heavenly Sword did after coming out was to stretch. She, who had not been born for hundreds of years, seemed to know how precious sunlight was. "Lady Heavenly Sword," Lu Lei pays his respects. Seeing Heavenly Sword, Lu Lei bowed to her. Actually, as an immortal sword wielder, Lu Lei did not have to show any respect to a treasured sword wielder like Heavenly Sword. However, out of respect for the sword wielder, Lu Lei still bowed. "Congratulations on being born, Lady Heavenly Sword." "Congratulations on being born, Lady Heavenly Sword." Seeing Lu Lei, an immortal sword wielder, bow, the rest of the people present did not dare to not pay their respects. Wouldn't that be embarrassing, Lu Lei? Because of that, everyone present bowed to the Sky-Reliant Sword. "Haha, everyone is so passionate. So passionate." The Heaven-Reliant Sword was all smiles as she returned the greeting. She appeared to be very amiable and amiable. Heavenly Sword pays her respects to everyone. That's strange. Didn't they say that Lady Heavenly Sword was very difficult to get along with? Isn't she quite easy to talk to? She's quite polite. Everyone who knew about Heavenly Sword exchanged glances. She was different from the legendary Lady Heavenly Sword. "Heavenly Sword, I told you that I would have you in real life." Gohan, who had recovered from his petrified state, walked to Heavenly Sword's side weakly. This weakness was a special reaction after giving birth to a sword wielder. Compared to the poor pregnant women who needed to give birth for 1 or 2 months, Gohan only needed to be weak for 10 minutes. This was already considered fortunate. "Hero, do I know you? Do we know each other?" Heavenly Sword turned her head and looked at Gohan. "Alright, let me introduce myself. My name is Gohan. From today onwards, I will be your sword wielder." Gohan extended a hand, wanting to shake hands with his sword wielder. "TSK." Heavenly Sword ignored Gohan's outstretched hand. Instead, she walked around Gohan, paying particular attention to Gohan's face. She looked at it carefully a few times, almost looking at every detail on Gohan's face. Only then did she shake Gohan's hand. "Not bad, you look good. I'm very satisfied. You're much better than that sword wielder who was uglier than Liu Bei and disgusted me. From today onwards I will protect you. You just have to do your job well and buy me a few dozen liters of good wine every day. You don't have to worry about anything else. Let's drink and sing, live a carefree and unrestrained life." After saying that, Heavenly Sword actually started singing. At this moment, everyone suddenly understood why Heavenly Sword's previous sword wielder had severed all ties with Heavenly Sword. They didn't know if it was lucky or unlucky to have such a sword wielder. Everyone looked at Gu-han with pity in their eyes. Chapter 287. Little guy, you're pretty awesome. Seeing that Gu-han had returned to normal, Lu Lei slowly walked in front of Gu-han. Gu-han greets sword immortal cloudy sky. When Gu-han saw Lu Lei, he immediately bowed. This made Lu Lei's expression slightly better, but it was still very ugly. Alright, come with me to the discipline committee. Tell me, how should you deal with your crime of forcefully synchronizing? Although Lu Lei didn't really want to lock up Gu-han for a year or two because of his love for talent, it was still necessary for him to be locked up for a month or two. It was also good to cut down this kid's spirit. This Gu-han actually dared to violate Sword Pavilion's rules. If he didn't get a taste of his power, wouldn't this kid be able to ascend to the heavens in the future? TSK, I didn't think that the first thing this heroine does after coming out is see her sword bearer being taken to the discipline committee. TSK, this is really interesting. Etian had unknowingly sat on the chandelier on the ceiling. She was swaying back and forth like she was sitting on a seesaw. Oh right, it seems like I used to go to the discipline committee with that ugly freak to play for a few days. Those old fogies in the discipline committee were really nice to this heroine. They treated me with good wine and good meat. I really miss it, Etian said leisurely, causing the people under her to wonder what exactly Etian and her sword wielder had done a few hundred years ago, treating a place as terrifying as the discipline committee of the Feng Shui sect, as if it were a restaurant. Ahem. Lu Lei coughed. Alright, you two, come with me. Senior Yun Xiao, it's naturally not a problem for me to go with you. But, why do you have to bring this kid to the discipline committee? Gu-han had an expression of, I don't understand, a look of being wronged. You don't understand? Lu Lei was so angry that his eyebrows were raised. He pointed at the guide and said, You, come here and tell him why he wants to go with me to the discipline committee. Yes. The guide walked over timidly. She was actually very reluctant to answer Lu Lei's question, because if she really answered, she would offend Gu-han again. Previously, Gu-han had only been an ancient sword-tier swordsman. Whether or not he could successfully synchronize himself to become a treasured sword-tier swordsman was still a big question mark. This guide had the backing of the Sword Pavilion, so he really wasn't afraid of Gu-han. However, once Gu-han became a treasure-grade sword wielder, and a treasure-grade sword wielder of the Heavenly Sword at that, things would be different. In front of a treasure sword wielder, he was nothing more than a fart. If the other party wanted to deliberately deal with him, there was no need to directly target him. Targeting his relatives and family would be enough to make him suffer for the rest of his life. However, this guide did not dare to not answer Lu Lei's question. What a joke! Lu Lei was an immortal sword saint rank, and he was also his superior. It would be absurd to offend him. Lord Gu-han did not pay the hero coins and directly synchronized with Lady Heavenly Sword tier. This violated the rules of the Sword Pavilion. The guide first honestly recounted Gu-han's sins, and then quickly added, This is also my fault. Firstly, I might not have explained it clearly, and Lord Gu-han did not react in time. This is all my fault, all my fault. I have already covered for Lord Gu-han and shouldered part of the responsibility. Now, Gu-han should not be so petty as to bear a grudge against me, right? The guide thought silently. Actually, throughout the entire process, other than being a little bad-tempered and snobbish, this guide basically did not do anything wrong. She had done what needed to be done, and she had reminded Gu-han of what needed to be done. She could be considered to have done her job. She should not have shouldered half of the responsibility and taken the initiative to take the blame. But she still took the initiative to bear it. This was the sorrow of a small fry. Ordinary people who did not become sword-bearers had to bear this sorrow. After all, their lives were built on the battle strength of sword-bearers. Everything had its own destiny. Seeing this guide say such words against her will, and take the blame for Gu-han, Wu Yu's face was full of helplessness and grievance. Gu Han felt bored in his heart. Acting cool was not as enjoyable as it was said to be. Alright, you can go. This has nothing to do with you. You already reminded me before I touched Heavenly Sword. You have already done your job. You did not do anything wrong, Gohan said. The guide did not know what to say. She could only look at Gohan with a face full of gratitude. The hatred and disgust she had for Gohan instantly disappeared without a trace. She even treated Gohan as a very good person. It was clearly Gohan who caused her to be in this situation, but she was sincerely grateful to Gohan. It was because Gohan had helped her and not pushed her. Many years later, when this guide was old, she would take a large poster of Gohan and show it to her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She would proudly tell them that their grandmother had spoken dozens of words to Gohan and received help from Gohan. This made the younger generation feel sincere admiration and envy towards their grandmother. Alright, let's not talk about the topic anymore. Back in the Sword Pavilion, Lu Lei looked at this scene with a chuckle. After Gohan asked the guide to leave, he said, "What, you admit your guilt? You can come with me to the disciplinary committee now, right?" "I still can't go." Gohan shook his head and rejected Lu Lei once again. "Heh, I'm going to be angry now." Lu Lei angrily put his hands on his hips. "Brat, this old man is a dignified immortal sword wielder. Every second I earn a few hundred hero coins. You King dare to fool me? I wouldn't dare. How would I dare to wash away Sir Sword Immortal's name? It's just that I really didn't break the Sword Pavilion's rules. I followed the rules." Gohan smiled and raised his arm. "Senior Yun Xiao, I have a message to send to your terminal. You'll understand why I didn't break the Sword Pavilion's rules after you read it. Alright, I want to see what you're capable of." Lu Lei and Gohan touched each other's terminals and became friends with Gohan. Gohan was in luck this time. He actually became friends with an immortal sword wielder. This was equivalent to becoming friends with a member of the Politburo before the apocalypse. If you showed off your WeChat and showed that you were friends with XX Shi or XX Li, you could brag about it for the rest of your life. However, Lu Lei was only the second immortal sword wielder friend in Gohan's contact list. The first was Wuzhang Shifang. After all, he had promised Gohan that as long as he fulfilled the conditions, he would take Gohan as his disciple. It was necessary to leave a contact number for easy communication. After adding Gohan as a friend, Gohan sent a picture to Lu Lei. When Lu Lei saw the picture, his expression changed several times. In the end, he had no choice but to nod. "Alright. Although I'm very unhappy, you really didn't break the Sword Pavilion's rules." Hearing Lu Lei's words, everyone began to whisper among themselves. Just what kind of news would make the Pavilion Master unhappy but still approve of Gohan's actions? Could it be something from Sword Maiden Online? Suddenly, someone had a flash of inspiration. Isn't there another rule in the Sword Pavilion? If you can successfully synchronize with this Sword Maiden in the game, then you can waive the hero coin fee. Oh right, how could I forget that? Realization dawned on everyone. According to the Sword Pavilion's rules, if you wanted to synchronize with a top Sword Maiden, you had to either hand over a hero coin or successfully synchronize with the Sword Maiden in the game. Most sword wielders used hero coins to synchronize with each other. Very few people used sword maidens in the game. Therefore, many people would forget about this rule. For example, the guide had completely forgotten about this rule. If she had remembered better, she would have asked Gohan about the game, and things would not have turned out this way. Fortunately, only a few people who had fought with Gohan knew that military governor had the heavenly sword in the game. Most people did not know that the military governor's sword maiden was the heavenly sword. Those who were present rarely played games. Some of them did not even know who the military governor was. No one associated Gohan with the military governor. Senior Yun Xiao, since I didn't break the Sword Pavilion's rules, I'll take my leave. Guhan, who had successfully obtained the heavenly sword, prepared to leave the sword pavilion. It was exciting to show off and then run. "Wait," Lu Lei muttered. "You can't leave yet. The heavenly sword Maiden is very important. I have something to tell you. Come to my office." Yes. Guhan did not hesitate and immediately obeyed Lu Lei's order. How could he reject an immortal sword wielder's invitation to his office? It did not seem like a bad thing. Under everyone's envious gaze, Guhan followed behind Lu Lei and slowly walked to the elevator on the second floor. Then, he used the elevator and went straight to the sixth floor, where Lu Lei's office was. According to the standard construction model of the sword pavilion, the first floor was where the ancient sword maidens were stored. The second floor was for treasured swords, and so on. The third floor was for famed swords, the fourth floor was for spiritual swords, the fifth floor was for immortal swords, and the sixth floor was for emperor swords. The security on each floor was stricter than the one before. As the sword tower master, he had set up his office on the sixth floor, alone with the emperor sword. This way, if anyone wanted to take the emperor sword, they would have to get past Lu Lei, a celestial sword tier sword wielder. Unless it was an emperor sword tier sword wielder, a flood tier or a desolate tier Yuan Shun, it was impossible. Lu Lei's office was very large, but the layout was very simple. There weren't any fancy decorations, only thick books. Guhan noticed that many of the books were protected by high-tech bookshelves. Books that needed to be protected by high-tech protective equipment should all be precious books from before the apocalypse. For example, Guhan noticed that there was a book called 3 Years of Simulation of 5 Years of College Entrance Examination, Mathematics in an Obvious Position. This was a rare treasure, and there were less than 10 of them left in the world. If someone passed one down to their descendants and sold it, they would not have to work for 200 years. I don't have many hobbies, but I like to collect these books. The mistakes we humans made in the past were too stupid. We descendants tried our best, but we only recovered 7 to 8%. Sigh. This was the first thing Lu Lei said after entering the office. Sit. Lu Lei pointed at a chair in the room. This was the second thing he said. From now on, you are my disciple. This was the third thing he said. Chapter 288. Hearing Lu Lei's words, Guhan did not answer for a long time, so Lu Lei repeated what he had just said. From now on, you are my disciple. This time, Guhan was completely annoyed. 2 days ago, he had shamelessly asked Wuzhang Shifang to accept him as a disciple, but Wuzhang Shifang had very arrogantly said that he had to get first place in the 8 Academies tournament before he could become his disciple. In the end, in just 2 days, an immortal sword tier sword wielder had taken the initiative to say that he was willing to accept Guhan as a disciple. To be honest, in terms of the quality of a master, Wuzhang Shifang was better than Lu Lei. Firstly, Wuzhang Shifang was ranked 5th among the immortal sword tier sword wielder, while Lu Lei was only ranked 11th. In terms of strength, Lu Lei was not as good as Wuzhang Shifang. Secondly, Wuzhang Shifang was young enough. He was only in his early 50s. With the physical quality of an immortal sword tier sword wielder, as long as he did not die in the hands of Yuan Ko, it would not be a problem for him to live for another 30 or 40 years. In that case, Wuzhang Shifang could protect himself for 30 or 40 years. In contrast, Lu Lei was already old. Looking at his physical condition, it would be difficult for him to live for another 3 or 5 years. Thirdly, Wuzhang Shifang had Hao Tianjiandi behind him. At a critical moment, he might even be able to form a relationship with Jiandi. This would make his safety much more reliable. However, Lu Lei was a loner, and it was said that his relationship with Sword Immortal Baiju was only SOSO. Although there were so many benefits to becoming Wuzhang Shifang's disciple, in his heart, Guhan was more than willing to become Lu Lei's disciple. Guhan had always been a proud person, and Wuzhang Shifang's test made Guhan feel a knot in his heart. However, because he could not find a second immortal sword tier sword wielder to get to know him, Gohan had to endure Wuzhang Shifang's test. However, things were different now. Sword Immortal Lu Lei had actually taken the initiative to take Gohan as his disciple. His attitude was more than 10 times better than Zhang Shifang's. Naturally, Gohan was willing to take Lu Lei as his master. However, before that, Gohan still wanted to know why Lu Lei would suddenly take him as his disciple. Senior Yun Shao is too kind. Gohan is overwhelmed by the favor. Gohan first gave a deep bow to Lu Lei and then said, "It's just that Gohan really doesn't understand. How did Gohan receive Senior's favor? Senior, please tell me the truth. Otherwise, I'm afraid I won't be able to sleep at night." "Kid, are you afraid that I, Lu Lei, will harm you?" Lu Lei cursed unhappily. "Fine, there's no harm in telling you, lest you have any problems with me, your master, in the future. Kid, do you know what the difficult sword era is?" Suddenly, Lu Lei asked Gohan this question. Difficult sword era. When Gohan heard these 4 words, information regarding the difficult sword era quickly appeared in his mind. The so-called difficult sword era referred to the gradual decrease in the number of sword bearers in history. The new sword bearers could not keep up with the dead sword bearers. At the same time, there was a severe shortage of high-level Jiandi sword bearers. This era was called the difficult sword era. Generally speaking, there were 2 criteria to determine whether an era had reached the difficult sword era. The first was that the number of new sword bearers was less than 10%, and the second was that the number of Jiandi sword bearers was less than 2. If these 2 criteria were met, it could basically be determined that the era had reached the difficult sword era. Just like the ancient book, the drama of the 3 kingdoms, the general trend of the world would be divided after being united for a long time, and united for a long time. It was the same for the difficult sword era. Every 200 to 300 years, humans would inexplicably usher in the difficult sword era. Before today, humans had encountered a total of 3 difficult sword eras. Thinking about it carefully, didn't the last difficult sword era end 230 years ago? In this way, the timing matched. When Gohan suddenly heard that the difficult sword era was about to arrive, his expression changed. This was an absolute secret to the Sword Council. It was a secret that no one could tell. Once the news of the difficult sword era was spread to Yuan-Ko, humans would definitely face a tragic war. Senior, it's better for juniors not to know about this kind of thing. Gohan did not want to know about this news, because once he knew, he would definitely be on the Sword Council's watch list. There might even be people monitoring his communication all the time to prevent him from divulging the news of the difficult sword era. It doesn't matter. You are my disciple. You are qualified to know about this. Lu Lei seemed to want to tell Gohan everything he knew. In fact, according to the statistics, the growth rate of the sword bearers last year was -6.87%. Although this year's statistics haven't come out yet, according to the statistics of our Yuzhang Sword Council, the growth rate in the first half of this year has dropped to -7.8%. It is estimated that it will break through -8% this year. And now there are only 2 Jiandi, Longshi Jiandi and Haotian Jiandi. In other words, the whole world will officially enter the difficult sword era in less than 5 years. The whole world will officially enter the difficult sword era in 5 years at the latest. This sentence instantly exploded in Gohan's mind. Gohan could never imagine that the difficult sword era would start from next year. This was the news that humans were most unwilling to hear. This meant that in the next 20 to 50 years, humans would face the greatest suffering in 300 years. Yes, the difficult sword era was the most difficult era for humans. Because of the large decrease in the number of sword bearers, humans had to give up a large number of strongholds outside the cities because they did not have enough strength to defend these strongholds. If they forcibly divided their manpower to guard these strongholds, they would only lose their already limited strength. Therefore, humans simply chose to give up the strongholds outside the cities during the difficult sword era and focused on defending the various base cities. They were looking forward to the end of the difficult sword era. Corresponding to the difficult sword era, the Yuan-ko would enter a very active state. They would seize this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to launch a tide-like attack on the human base cities. At that time, most of the base cities would only be guarded by the pitiful immortal sword-level sword-bearers. Once they were attacked by the flood or desolate-level Yuan-ko, it would simply be a massacre. Every time the difficult sword era occurred, there would be news of a few base cities that could not hold on. The cities would be completely breached, and a large number of sword-bearers would die. Almost all the civilians would die. Yes, when the sword-bearers could no longer defend the city, they could use the power of the sword lady to escape to another base city. However, the civilians could only be heartlessly abandoned in the city's shelter. If they were lucky, they might be able to hide in the shelter for a few decades, waiting for the difficult sword era to pass. If they were unlucky, they could only die. Oh yes, by the way, 99.9% of the civilians were the unlucky ones. There had been a total of 3 difficult sword eras. During the second difficult sword era, Yuzhong City, which did not have any emperor sword bearers, was unfortunately breached. All the humans in the city were basically killed. Only some of the family members of the sword bearers were moved to Yanjing City in advance, which saved their lives. When the difficult sword era passed and Yuzhong City was restored, it took a full 100 years to encourage fertility before the population returned to normal. Therefore, the difficult sword era was a disaster for the sword bearers. For the civilians, it was even more of a disaster. How could it be? So fast, there were no signs at all. Gohan mumbled to himself. Everything had happened too suddenly. The signs have been there for a long time. 5 years ago, we foresaw that the difficult sword era was coming. However, at that time, we estimated that there were still about 15 years before the difficult sword era. Unexpectedly, in less than 5 years, the time has advanced by a whole third. We are about to welcome the arrival of this terrible era. Lu Lei let out a long sigh. What's more frightening is that Haotian Jiendi might not be able to hold on for more than 5 years. At that time, the entire human race will only have Longsher Jiendi, and that is Jiendi. Even in the previous 3 difficult sword eras, during the worst times we humans had 2 Jiendi. However, now that we have entered the difficult sword era, humans will only have 1 Jiendi. This time's difficult sword era will probably be the difficult sword era with the most casualties in human history. Lu Lei's eyes were filled with endless worry. Among the 8 base cities, Yanjing City has the deepest heritage and produced the most Jiendi. In the previous 3 difficult sword eras, Yanjing City had the protection of a Jiendi. Therefore, Yanjing City did not suffer too much during the difficult sword era. But this time, even Yanjing City has lost the protection of the Sword Emperor. If things go wrong, the people of the Chinese bloodline might have to bear a terrifying calamity. Why are you telling me this? Gohan raised his head and stared at Lu Lei. These things are not things that an ancient sword wielder like me should know. Senior, why are you telling me this? First of all, let me correct a mistake of yours. You are no longer an ancient sword wielder. You are now a treasured sword wielder. Lu Lei was actually in the mood to crack a joke. You asked me why I am telling you this. Let me tell you, because I think highly of you. In other words, I think highly of the military governor. Military governor. Hearing this name, Gohan suddenly raised his head and looked at Lu Lei in disbelief. How did he know that he was the military governor? Don't be surprised, Gohan. Lu Lei patted Gohan's shoulder. This old man's greatest pleasure is to grind dungeons in Sword Maiden Online and get shards and whatnot. Coincidentally, I have a good friend's son who was tricked into joining the Yaoguang sword faction. It's not difficult to know that the military governor has a heavenly sword. It just so happened that you sent this message to me. This is fate. Hearing this, Gohan was speechless. It turned out that he had delivered himself to Lu Lei's doorstep. However, just because of his identity as the military governor, did Lu Lei think so highly of him? No matter how high his achievements were, they were only achievements in the game and had nothing to do with reality. Why did Lu Lei think so highly of him? There must be something that he was not clear about. Chapter 289. Are you still wondering why this old man would take you in as a disciple just because of your status as an admiral? Lu Lei saw the doubt in Gohan's heart and smiled. Have you heard of a saying? Cast the net wide, catch more fish, and select the best. Sword Immortal Baiju and I have already discussed it. In order to ensure that Yuzhong City can survive in the difficult sword era 5 years later, we must nurture those sword bearers with potential, so that Yuzhong City will not be without successors. In my life, I have seen countless geniuses. Some of them were even more talented than I am. One of them could even form a sword affinity with 10% of sword maidens at the same time. Such talents, as long as they continue to grow, 10% or 20% of them can reach my current position. But in the end, they all died. It's not that they did not have great strength, it's just that they were unlucky and met a strong enemy. They could not defeat, hide, or escape, and so they fell in the desert ruins. Lu Lei sighed. It's not that we can't save them. As long as we old guys at the Immortal Sword tier are willing to help, it's not impossible to save them from their desperate situation. But in the end, we old guys are still stingy with our lives. Who would be willing to give up 20 days of their lives to save someone who has nothing to do with them? Give up 20 days of life. Gohan was stunned. Didn't they say that using the giant world-breaking hand would only cause a period of weakness for 20 days? How did it become 20 days of life? This was what Wuzhang Shifang had said himself. Senior, why is it said on the internet that using the giant world-breaking hand will only cause a period of weakness for about 20 days? Gohan asked directly. That refers to those sword masters who are full of vigor. They practice ancient martial arts, and the vigor in their bodies is endless. Using the giant world-breaking hand to save you little guys requires a lot of vigor. Those who practice martial arts are full of vigor, and may be able to withstand the consumption of the giant world-breaking hand. But for old guys like us, if we want to use the break world big hand, we have to use our own lives. So that's how it is. Gohan was secretly startled. Wuzhang Shifang said that he would only have a period of 20 days of weakness. Didn't that mean that Wuzhang Shifang was also a sword master who cultivated ancient martial arts? This was something that had never been mentioned in the published information about Wuzhang Shifang. Gohan suppressed the speculation in his heart and listened to Lu Lei continue. If it weren't for the difficult sword era, this would be the right thing to do. It's understandable to preserve one's lifespan. However, in the upcoming difficult sword era, we would be digging our own graves if we continue to allow talented sword wielders to fall into the hands of our enemies. That's why Baiju and I each took in 2 disciples with the greatest potential. We'll escort them along the way so that they won't die prematurely on the path of immortal sword wielders. Gohan, you have great potential. I am very optimistic about you. You are one of the 2 disciples that I want to take in. Lu Lei explained the reason why he took the initiative to take in Gohan as a disciple. All the problems were explained clearly. Lu Lei had a premonition that he did not have much time left. He planned to choose those sword wielders with great potential to escort them along the way, so that they could become immortal sword wielders as soon as possible. This way, Yuzhong City would not have no immortal sword wielders after the death of Lu Lei and Baiju. I've told you everything I need to tell you. Why don't you quickly kneel down and worship me as your master? Lu Lei snorted coldly. How could this Gohan be so tactless? Did he want him to beg him? Gohan was naturally very willing to worship Lu Lei as his master. However, a few days ago, he thought that he was smart to worship Wuzhang Shifang as his master. Now, it had become a huge hidden danger. He had already agreed to participate in Wuzhang Shifang's test, but now he suddenly worshipped Lu Lei as his master. Who knew if Wuzhang Shifang would be petty and bear a grudge against him? This was a blatant slap to Wuzhang Shifang's face. At that time, it might cause some unnecessary trouble. At the same time, if he concealed this matter and did not tell Lu Lei. If this matter reached Lu Lei's ears in the future, wouldn't he be in a terrible position? Therefore, Gohan had to take the initiative to tell Lu Lei about him worshipping Wuzhang Shifang as his master. The rest was up to Lu Lei to decide. If there was any blame, it would be on Lu Lei. Therefore, Gohan replied decisively. Senior, it's not that I don't want to worship you as my master. It's just that I have an agreement with Wuzhang Shifang, so I dare not make a rash decision. As soon as Gohan said this, Lu Lei was surprised. How did this guy get involved with Wuzhang Shifang? What agreement do you have with Wuzhang Shifang? Tell me quickly. Therefore, Gohan told Lu Lei everything about himself and Wuzhang Shifang without hiding anything. Lu Lei's old face was a myriad of colors as he listened, and he did not know whether to laugh or cry. He never thought that the disciple he fancied would actually have a secret relationship with Wuzhang Shifang. No, it seemed that the adjective secret relationship could not be used. However, he did not expect that the Grand Prince seed was dug out by this kid, Gohan. This time, Lu Lei was even more satisfied with Gohan. What was the most important thing to become an immortal sword wielder? Strength? Bloodline? Wisdom? Although these things were of some help to become an immortal sword wielder, in the end, they were not the most important thing to become an immortal sword wielder. For an immortal sword wielder, the most important thing was one's character, or luck. Even if one's strength was nature-defying, bloodline pure, and wisdom outstanding. As long as one's character was bad, luck was bad, and there was no sword maiden of the next level who was willing to synchronize with you, then one would be trash, destined to be like this for the rest of one's life. This kind of example was not uncommon. Countless amazing sword wielder had fallen on this road. The most famous one was a famed sword wielder 500 years ago. He became a famed sword wielder at the age of 19. With the physique of a famed sword wielder, he finally accumulated the standard of 10 million quarks of sword essence to reach the Jiandi level. As a famed sword wielder, he could skip 4 levels of Yuan Ko and fight against the U-level Yuan Ko, who was equivalent to an immortal sword wielder. Such an amazing sword wielder was once thought to be the next Jiandi sword wielder, but in the end, he died of old age at the famed sword level. No matter how amazing he was, there was no sword maiden of the spiritual sword level who was willing to synchronize with him. This was completely helpless. Therefore, when Lu Lei heard that Gohan was able to dig out a prince seed, his satisfaction with Gohan immediately skyrocketed. He had dug out a prince seed on his first mining trip. With this kind of character, this kind of luck, it seemed that he was at least a spiritual sword level. Gohan, don't worry. This Sword Immortal will help you clarify this matter with Sword Immortal Shifang. That Sword Immortal Shifang took your Prince Seed and still set up this almost impossible test for you. This means that he was originally not willing to take you as a disciple, and only wanted your Prince Seed. I will help you reject him. I think he will only be happy and not angry. Lu Lei's words were reasonable and convincing. Indeed, Wuzhang Shifang did not want to take Gohan as a disciple. With Lu Lei taking the blame, Wuzhang Shifang was naturally more than willing. Gohan understands. Gohan thanks Master. Seeing that Lu Lei had said things to this extent and taken the blame to this extent, if Gohan still refused, then he would really be an idiot. Therefore, Gohan made a prompt decision and kowtowed a few times in front of Lu Lei, calling him Master, and what not as if it was free. Ha ha ha! Lu Lei laughed heartily. Not only was this disciple's luck not bad, he was also smart and tactful. Very good, very good. Suddenly, Lu Lei seemed to have thought of something. His face darkened. What a pity, what a pity! He sighed twice. I wonder why Master is sighing? Gohan asked obediently. Sigh, Master is just feeling pity for the prince seed that you gave to that Wuzhang Shifang. Now that I have taken you in as a disciple, the prince seed is in his hands. He did nothing and just got a prince seed out of thin air. Isn't that a pity? Lu Lei felt sorry for the prince seed that Gohan had given to Wuzhang Shifang. This thing was an irresistible temptation to any immortal sword wielder. Master, don't be silly. Look at what this disciple has in his hands. Gohan opened his hands, and a resplendent dimensional crystal mine glistened. You still have a prince seed. Lu Lei sucked in a breath of cold air as he stared at the Duke seed in Gohan's hand. He didn't even blink. Good heavens, what kind of disciple did he take in? He actually managed to obtain a prince seed and 2 duke seeds in one go. This kind of character was something that had never been seen before. Master doesn't know, but this disciple's luck has always been good. This time, I got a prince seed, 2 prince seeds, and a duke seed. This is the last prince seed I have in my hand. Master accepted me as a disciple, and I have nothing to repay you with. I can only give this last prince seed to Master as a gift. I hope Master doesn't mind. Gohan, this liar, had clearly gotten 4 prince seeds. At this time, there were still 2 prince seeds in his dimensional pocket. Good disciple, I will accept your gift. Lu Lei laughed and did not stand on ceremony. He put Gohan's prince seed into his pocket. However, after receiving such a precious gift from Gohan, Lu Lei naturally could not show any other expression. He walked to the bookshelf in the office, took out a thick book, and handed it to Gohan. Good disciple, this book is Master's gift. Keep it well and study it day and night. You will have unexpected gains. Gohan took the book that Lu Lei gave him. He saw the words, Gentleman's Book, written on the cover. Other than that, there was nothing else on the cover. Gohan flipped open the book and read a few pages. Then, he decisively closed the book and put it into his dimensional pocket. This book was actually filled with pictures of anime that could make one's blood boil. Gohan did not expect that the book with the name Gentleman was actually a book like this. However, since Lu Lei gave this book to Gohan, there must be a reason. Gohan could not be careless. He wanted to bring it home and study it carefully. Chapter 290. Have you really decided to take this Gohan as your disciple? When Gohan left Lu Lei's room, White Stallion Sword Immortal Zhu Wudao actually walked out from a small door in the office. It seemed like Zhu Wudao had seen everything that had just happened. He already knelt down and called me master. Why are you still asking me this question? Lu Lei rolled his eyes at Zhu Wudao. Why? Are you envious that I took in a good disciple? TSK, our Yuzhong city's best treasured sword, the heavenly sword, was taken by him. What reason do I have not to take him as my disciple? He only took the heavenly sword. Whether he really has potential or not, we still need to test him in actual combat. Zhu Wudao said coldly. What's there to test? Just for this regional king seed alone, I have to take him down. Lu Lei bragged about his regional king seed in front of Zhu Wudao. He had originally planned to take a loss by taking down Gohan today. He had not expected to earn a regional king seed for himself. Was it true that good people were rewarded in this world? A regional king seed like you should share half with me. Looking at the regional king seed in Lu Lei's hands, Zhu Wudao, who was a little jealous, suddenly said this. Why should I? Why should I share half with you? Lu Lei was indignant. This is a gift from my disciple to me, his master. What has it got to do with you? Of course it has something to do with me, Zhu Wudao said slowly. The medical pod that saved his life was given to him by me. Without my medical pod, he would have died a long time ago. Where are you going to find this disciple? Don't talk nonsense with me. How much is a medical chamber worth? You want to share it with my royal seed with just this? Hurry up and scram. Lu Lei looked at Zhu Wudao with disdain. This guy was too shameless. He wanted to get a regional king seed with the help of a medical pod? That's not an ordinary medical pod. It's my immortal sword-grade medical pod. It's the medical pod that you and I use to save lives. Until now, my medical pod is still in your disciples' hands. Shouldn't we settle this score? Zhu Wudao said angrily. This Lu Lei was too infuriating. Alright, forget it. It's just an immortal sword rank medical pod. What the hell is this? Look at how wronged you are. Lu Lei casually shook out a medical pod from his dimensional pocket and threw it in front of Zhu Wudao. Take it. This is mine. It's brand new and unopened. I'll return it to you on behalf of my disciple. Now we're friends. Seeing the medical chamber in front of him, Zhu Wudao almost couldn't breathe. Damn it, it seemed that he didn't even have the room to refute. Yifei, hurry up and choose one. I'm begging you, you've already exceeded the time limit by 5 minutes. If the supervisor finds out, I'll be screwed. On the first floor of the sword pavilion, a guide accompanied Song Yifei as he walked among the sword ladies. Unlike the guide who despised Gohan, this guide seemed to have a good relationship with Song Yifei. He even delayed Song Yifei's choice. This was not strange. Song Yifei was a frequent customer of the sword pavilion. She had been to the sword pavilion almost 40 times. She also happened to work at the service center for sword bearers. Naturally, she was familiar with the staff of the sword pavilion. In addition, Song Yifei had a good personality and treated her friends sincerely. When she was in trouble, she would do her best to help. Therefore, she was very popular in the sword pavilion. In order to give Song Yifei more time to choose a sword lady, the guide even took the initiative to help her delay time. Compared to Gohan, this one was like heaven and earth. Alright, then I'll. Song Yifei sighed. She did not mean to delay time. It was just that she had failed so many times that she was starting to have an instinctive fear of choosing a sword lady. Because she was afraid that she would fail again, Song Yifei did not even have the courage to hold the sword lady. Then I'll try this one. Song Yifei set her sights on an ancient sword-rank sword lady called the Shadowless Sword. On the counter of the Shadowless Sword, the golden brocade box was empty. There was only a long sword in the silver brocade box. This meant that the sword lady here was the artificial sword lady of the Shadowless Sword, not the natural sword lady of the Shadowless Sword. Song Yifei choosing the Shadowless Sword meant that she had given up on the natural sword lady and chosen the artificial sword lady, which had a higher success rate. This was a choice that she had no other choice. After failing for so long, Song Yifei had completely lost confidence in herself. She just wanted to synchronize quickly and get rid of the obsession in her heart. Don't be in such a hurry to choose, Yifei. There's no harm in looking a little longer. Another guide walked over and said softly to Song Yifei and the guide who had been accompanying Song Yifei, "You guys don't know, but I heard that Lady Tian has been born. The entire second floor is in chaos. The leaders are all gathered on the second floor to watch the show. They don't have time to help you stall for time. Don't rush Yifei. Let her choose a little longer. How can she succeed in a hurry?" The appearance of this guide completely proved Guhan's failure as a person. What? Lady Tian has been born. Song Yifei was shocked. This news was too sudden. She needed a lot of time to digest this shocking news. Yeah, I heard that it was coordinated by a handsome young man. However, Shao Qin, who was guiding him, was unlucky. I don't know why, but she's going to be fined 2 months of her salary. How tragic! While the two guides were talking about the Sky Reliant sword, Song Yifei was lost in thought. She did not know why, but she felt that the handsome guy who had synchronized with the Sky Reliant sword was Guhan. Thinking of this, Song Yifei began to panic. She suddenly felt that the river-like gap between her and Gohan had instantly become a quicksand river. Yifei, let's go somewhere else. There's a natural sword lady there. The wielder of the sword just died. You definitely haven't tried it before. I'll take you there to try it. The guide who had come later pulled Song Yifei and wanted to lead her to another place. The guide exerted force, but she realized that Song Yifei's feet seemed to be nailed down. She could not move at all. Yifei, what's wrong? The guide asked in confusion. Sister, thank you for your kindness. I've already decided. I'll try it with this shadowless sword. Song Yifei smiled bitterly. She was about to touch the artificial shadowless sword. She did not know why, but she just wanted to end the synchronized experiment quickly and escape from the sword pavilion. But this is only an artificial sword, lady. Moreover, the guide who came later wanted to persuade her, but she was stopped by the one who had come earlier. Forget it. Since Yifei has chosen this, she will choose this. No matter how powerful your sword lady is, it's useless if she doesn't succeed. On the contrary, since she has not firmly chosen this, there might be a reason behind it. Don't stop her. All right, you're right. After being persuaded, the guide gave up on trying to persuade Song Yifei. Hearing this, Song Yifei's heart was like a pickled vegetable in a can. How could she be fated with this shadowless sword? She just wanted to escape from this place as soon as possible. Song Yifei's hand moved closer to the artificial shadowless sword in the brocade box. If there was no reaction for 10 seconds after touching it, then Song Yifei's synchronized experiment would fail. However, Song Yifei was already used to failure. Girl, if I were you, I would never touch that sword. At this critical moment, a leisurely voice suddenly came from the sky. Wait, why is it coming from the sky? Song Yifei and the two guides raised their heads and saw a beauty in ancient clothes sitting on the chandelier on the ceiling. She was holding a sword in one hand and a wine gourd in the other. She gulped down a mouthful of wine. Who are you? Come down now. Don't you know that alcohol is forbidden in the sword pavilion? The guide was a little angry at this scene. How dare she drink in the sword pavilion? That was a crime worthy of imprisonment. Heroine, I'm coming down now. The beautiful woman in the ancient costume jumped down from the chandelier and steadily appeared in front of the three of them. A strong aroma of wine instantly filled the nostrils of Song Yifei and the other two. The aroma of wine was so fragrant and tempting that even Song Yifei and the other two, who never drank, could not help but want to take a sip of the wine in the wine gourd. Are you the sword lady? Looking at Etion's equipment and the shining sword in her hand, the two guides suddenly realized that the person talking to them was a sword lady. No wonder she dared to drink in the sword pavilion. Those who don't know are fearless. However, why was this sword lady here alone? Where did her sword wielder go? Respected sword lady, alcohol is forbidden in the sword pavilion. Can you drink after you leave the sword pavilion? Since the other party was a sword lady, their attitude couldn't be bad. They had to be gentle and persuasive. This heroine wants to drink. Even if the sky falls down, don't think of stopping me. Etion gulped down another mouthful of wine and burped. She smiled at Song Yifei and said, Girl, don't touch this shadowless sword. It doesn't suit you. In other words, there aren't many ancient sword ladies that suit you in the whole world. I know. My talent is too bad. Song Yifei's expression was gloomy. Hee, but since there aren't many, there are still a few that suit you. Just nice, I know a sword lady that suits you. Etion looked at Song Yifei teasingly and said, How about it? Do you want to know which sword lady it is? Suddenly hearing Etion say that there was a suitable sword maiden for her, Song Yifei felt as if she had flown up to the heavens. Right now, she was like a drowning person. Even if it was a reed, she would hold it tightly in her hands, unwilling to let go. However, this sword lady looked very frivolous. Did she really know where the sword lady suited her was? How about it? Do you want to know? Etion asked again. Yes, very much. I really want to know. Please tell me which sword lady it is. If I really succeed, I will be grateful to you for the rest of my life. Song Yifei said excitedly. Who cares about her? She had to try her best. All right, but I have a condition. As Etian spoke, he took a step forward and walked to Song Yifei's side. He wrapped his arms around Song Yifei's waist and pulled her into his embrace. Then, like a pervert, he took a deep breath on Song Yifei's neck. "Let me kiss you," Etian suddenly said. "What?" Song Yifei couldn't react at all. "Pa!" Etian kissed Song Yifei's lip. Oh, it was a French kiss. Chapter 291. This is the place. Without the guide leading the way, Etian led Song Yifei around the first floor of the Sword Pavilion with great familiarity. Finally, they arrived at a corner with the darkest lights and the worst visibility. Most of the counters there were empty. There were no brocade boxes on them. Only a few of them had 1 or 2 brocade boxes on them. If one were to go in and look at the brocade boxes, one would be disappointed to find that they were still empty. Therefore, there were no sword ladies in this area. No wonder the lights were dim and the wind was chilly. It turned out that the sword ladies were trying to save electricity. At first glance, this area was ridiculously large. It was even larger than the areas where the sword ladies were placed. This place feels a bit scary. Compared with the other bustling places in the Sword Pavilion, this area seemed extremely deserted. A gust of cold wind blew over and Song Yifei felt goosebumps all over his body. "This is the reserved area of the Sword Pavilion," the guide said in a deep voice. "This is the reserved area of the Sword Pavilion. It is prepared for the sword ladies who will enter the Sword Pavilion in the future. There are no sword ladies here. Lady, why did you bring Yifei here?" The so-called reserved area was prepared for the sword ladies who were not in their own sword pavilions. Every sword pavilion in a base city had the dream of collecting all the sword ladies. Therefore, they reserved a place for each sword lady in their own sword pavilions. Therefore, a sword pavilion that did not want to collect all the illustrations was not a good loser. It seemed that they had gone astray. Back to the topic at hand. In this reserved area, the counters inside were all empty, just like what Song Yifei had seen. That was why the two guides were curious as to why the Sword Maiden would bring Song Yifei here. There was no Sword Maiden here. "Pfft, how long have you little turnips lived? How long have I lived?" Etian glared at the two guides and said proudly, "Back then, the blueprint of this sword pavilion was drawn by me, this heroine. Otherwise, how could you build this sword pavilion to such a high and mighty level?" The two guides looked at each other. They finally understood why the sword pavilion in Yuzhong City was rated as the ugliest among the 8 base cities. It was all because of the sword lady in front of them. This sword tower was built when Yuzhong City was founded. Didn't that mean that this sword maiden was one of the higher-ups who founded Yuzhong City? The two guides silently thought about the origins of this sword lady. Meanwhile, Etian had walked to the darkest corner. She stomped on the ground a few times, listened to the sound, and nodded in satisfaction. "This is the place. There's no mistake. This heroine's memory is really good." As he spoke, Etian swung his Heaven Reliance sword and sent a powerful strand of sword energy towards the ground. "No, no!" Seeing this scene, the two guides turned pale with fright, but it was already too late. When Gohan came out of Lu Lei's office, he did not immediately see his sword maiden, Etian. But that was not strange. In the game, Gohan had fully experienced Etian's character. He knew that she liked to live a carefree life. It was impossible to expect her to wait for him outside the door. Therefore, Gohan calmly followed the feeling of the sword mark and slowly tracked Etian's position. Luckily, Etian did not seem to have left the sword pavilion. She was only on the first floor, which greatly reduced the difficulty for Gohan to find her. However, when Gohan was about to reach Etian's position, he suddenly heard a loud explosion. Did Yuan Ko invade the base city? Gohan's heart skipped a beat. He immediately ran towards the location of the explosion. In the end, he saw Etion standing there proudly with his face covered in dirt. There was a huge hole in the ground, and the two guides were crying as they looked at the scene. Oh right, Song Yifei was here as well. Etion, what are you doing? How could you destroy the sword pavilion? A few black lines appeared on Gu Han's forehead. As expected, this heavenly sword was not easy to deal with. The moment it appeared, it destroyed the grounds of the sword pavilion. Ordinary people would be immediately executed for destroying the buildings of the sword pavilion. As for the person wielding the sword, depending on the cause and effect of the matter, they would be sentenced to 10 years in prison or beheading. In short, destroying the sword pavilion was a crime punishable by death. What's wrong? Can't I destroy this place? Etion coldly snorted. This place was built by me and that brat Chation, brick by brick, tile by tile. Even if this heroine were to tear this place down, you juniors would still be able to say that it was good to tear it down. Do you understand? Etion. Your Lady Etion. The guides were intoxicated. So this this description was absolutely correct. Sword Maiden was actually Lady Etion, the #1 swordswoman. No wonder she said that the sword pavilion was built by her. Wasn't Lady Etion the sword maiden of Zhejiang Jiandi, the one who founded Yuzhang City? Logically speaking, this place was indeed built by Etion, brick by brick. Etion demolishing this place was just to get rid of her own property. So this sword maiden is Lady Etion. It's just as I guessed, Gohan's sword maiden is really Lady Etion, Song Yifei thought to herself. When Gohan appeared, Song Yifei had already lowered her head. Now that she had confirmed that Gohan had coordinated with Lady Etion, she lowered her head and followed him. You come here. Etion's hand pulled, and Song Yifei felt as if someone had pulled on his chest. He was pulled into Etion's hand through the air. It turned out that Etion had used sword chi to pull Song Yifei to her side. Seeing Etion suddenly do this, Gohan's face twitched. Etion, she's not my friend. You're not allowed to do anything to her. I know she's your woman. I can smell your scent on her from 10 meters away, my new master. I have no intention of harming your woman. I just want to help her. She's such a pitiful girl, we can't let her go to waste. Etion's words caused the entire scene to become ambiguous. When the two guides saw the look in Gohan's eyes, they felt that something was wrong. That's because I was behind her in the queue. As time goes on, it's not strange for her to get some scent on me. Yifei and I are just ordinary friends. Don't ruin Yifei's innocence, Gohan said coldly. This was a very convincing explanation, and it was indeed so. Unfortunately, the news of Song Yifei having an affair with Gohan, the sword-bearer of the heavenly sword, quickly spread through the sword tower. In the end, the entire sword-bearer service center knew about it. All right. You guys know clearly whether she's innocent or not. What has it got to do with this heroine? Etion chuckled. He pointed at the big hole in the ground and said to Song Yifei, Do you see the brocade box in the hole? Take it out for me. The hole created by the heavenly sword was over 1 meter wide and a few meters deep. It was also a standard cubic space. It was impossible for a single sword chi from the heavenly sword to create such a large hole. Even the full-powered strike of a sword lady at the famed sword rank would not be able to create such a large hole. Therefore, there must have been such a hole in the first place. This was a secret room that had been hidden there when the sword pavilion was built. It seemed that this secret room was a secret room that the heavenly sword had secretly prepared when the heaven-shrouding sword emperor was building the sword tower. Otherwise, there was no way the heavenly sword would know that there was a secret room hidden underground. Gohan walked to the top of the secret room and looked down. At the bottom of the secret room, there was a gray brocade box. After hundreds of years, this brocade box was only a little gray. It seemed like the material used to make the box was not ordinary. However, what did the heavenly sword put in the brocade box, and why did it have to be hidden in such a secret room? Gohan, Seeing the dark hole, Song Yifei suddenly thought of countless horror stories. There might be something terrifying hidden in this kind of secret room for hundreds of years. Thinking of this, Song Yifei could not help but shiver. She subconsciously wanted to ask Gohan for help. "I'll go down with you." When Gohan saw Song Yifei's expression, he knew that it was useless to persuade her to go down. Only by going down with her would Song Yifei's fear be alleviated. So, without waiting for Song Yifei to reply, Gohan grabbed her waist and jumped down into the secret room. In the end, Gohan's casual action of grabbing her waist instantly became the best evidence of an ambiguous relationship in the eyes of the two guides. It gave the rumors about Gohan and Song Yifei a vivid and convincing piece of evidence. What the F***ck? A minute later, Gohan jumped out of the secret room with Song Yifei, who was hugging the brocade box, and returned to the ground. At the same time, the management personnel who received the news that the ground on the first floor had been destroyed finally arrived. "Greetings, Lady E." These managers were the ones who had personally witnessed the birth of the Heavenly Sword. They had also witnessed the Heavenly Sword's terrible and strange temper. Now that they saw the Heavenly Sword standing here and the huge hole in the ground, even the stupidest person could guess that the hole had a deep connection with the Heavenly Sword. Dispense with the formalities, dispense with the formalities. This heroine doesn't have that many rules. Etion was all smiles. It seemed like she really enjoyed it. "I built this sword pavilion back then. Now that I want to dig a hole, you guys don't have any objections, right?" The management personnel looked at each other. The sword pavilion was indeed built by Etion and Jitian Jiendi. Logically speaking, it didn't matter if they tore it down, but if they really dug such a big hole, it would be hard to explain. "It's fine. If Lady Etion likes it, the entire sword pavilion can be torn down and rebuilt." At this time, Lu Lei also rushed over with a smile. He was speaking from the bottom of his heart. He had long since disliked the ugly architectural style of the sword pavilion. However, it was a historical site left behind by the ancestors, so he couldn't do anything about it. If the sword lady, Etion, who built the sword pavilion back then, tore it down, that would be perfect. Lu Lei could naturally redesign the sword pavilion. "No need, no need." Etion waved her hand. "I'm just taking out the things that were placed here back then." Chapter 292. This was buried when the sword pavilion was established. Lu Lei was taken aback. As the sword pavilion master, it was embarrassing that he didn't know about this. "That's right, hee." Etion smiled strangely. He pointed at the brocade box in Song Yifei's hand and said, "Open it and take a look. I promise you'll like it." Song Yifei nodded and opened the brocade box obediently. Everyone's attention was focused on the brocade box. They wanted to see what kind of treasure was inside the brocade box that was buried when the sword pavilion was first established. As a result, when Song Yifei opened the lid of the brocade box, he saw a shiny golden sword on the golden satin. Although it had been buried underground for hundreds of years, the sword still shone with a dazzling golden light. The body of the sword was not long, but it was abnormally thick. There were all kinds of strange words written on it. No one knew what they meant, and no one could recognize them. "This is Sanskrit," Gohan blurted out when he saw the words on the blade. After a cultural extinction, there were not many people who could recognize Sanskrit. Gohan had only seen some Sanskrit words in a book. That was how he recognized the words on the sword. However, if Gohan had to explain the meaning of the Sanskrit, Gohan would be powerless. "You said it's Sanskrit." Lu Lei's eyes glowed when he heard Gohan say the word Sanskrit. There are Sanskrit words on the blade. Could it be the extremely rare Buddhist sword mistress? The onlookers were shocked again when they heard Lu Lei say the words, Buddhist sword mistress. The Confucian sword mistress, martial arts sword mistress, diabolism sword mistress, martial arts sword mistress, diabolism sword mistress, and martial arts sword mistress were the most common. However, it did not mean that there were no other sword mistresses. It was just that they were very rare. For example, there were only 2 human sword mistresses. For Buddhist sword mistresses, although it was said that there were no less than 10 Buddhist sword mistresses, the truth was that apart from the sword pavilion in Yenjing, none of the other sword pavilions in the 8 base cities could be found. The rarer something was, the greater its value. Every sword pavilion in a base city would dream of owning 1 or 2 swords so that they could show off in front of the sword pavilions in other base cities. He had never expected to find a Buddhist sword mistress hidden in his secret chamber in Yuzhong City. Come, trust me, hold her. Under Yi Tian's command, Song Yifei stretched out his trembling hand and grabbed the hilt of the Buddhist sword Maiden. In an instant it shone brightly. Just like what Yi Tian said, after 10 years and 38 failures, Song Yifei finally succeeded in synchronizing his first sword Maiden. The sword bearer stays. The rest of you, get out of here. Seeing that Song Yifei had entered the state of nurturing the sword lady, Lu Lei immediately ordered the others to leave, leaving only the sword bearers to form a human wall to protect Song Yifei. Seeing that Song Yifei had succeeded in synchronizing the sword maiden, Yi Tian snickered. He took out his wine gourd, intending to drink another mouthful of fine wine. In the end, something embarrassing happened. There wasn't even a drop of wine left in his gourd. Yi Tian's wine gourd wasn't limitless. Instead, it would slowly recover after a period of time. Even Dukong wine, which had the fastest recovery rate, needed 3 minutes to recover a mouthful of wine. For a moment, Yi Tian, who had no wine to drink, began to feel uneasy. He jumped left and right like a monkey. Yi Tian, come here. Gohan said impatiently when he saw Yi Tian's strange appearance. What? Let me tell you, even though you're this heroine's sword bearer, even though you're quite handsome, even though I don't know what else you can do, this heroine is telling you, don't even think about ordering this heroine around. Yi Tian raised his head and said proudly. Sure enough, this person's personality was exactly the same as in the game. They were both the kind of people who pursued freedom with their eyes on their forehead. I told you to come here. Gohan frowned. This time, he brought along the power of the sword mark. Yi Tian had no choice but to obediently come to Gohan's side. Despicable. Shameless. You actually used the power of the sword mark. You sword bearers are all terrible. Yi Tian cursed. In the end, before she could finish speaking, her mouth was stuffed by a cylindrical object. Then, liquid continuously poured into Yi Tian's mouth from this cylindrical object. You actually dare to stuff this heroine's mouth. Wait, what is this taste? Yi Tian removed the object stuffed in her mouth and realized that it was a slender wine bottle. The liquid inside had a sweet and sour taste, as well as a rich fragrance of bread. More importantly, this liquid was actually a type of wine. It was a type of wine that Yi Tian had never drunk before. Yi Tian poured a few mouthfuls into her mouth and smacked her lip. She realized that this taste was quite suitable for her. What kind of drink is this? Is it wine? Yi Tian leaned on Gohan and asked. Do you like it? Gohan smiled. This is called kvass. It's a type of wine that came from Moscow. I thought that you might like it, so I brought it for you to try. You specially brought it for me to drink? Yi Tian's eyes blinked. She was a little touched. I don't drink. I know that sword bearers who don't carry a few bottles of wine with them are not worthy of being your sword bearer, Yi Tian. Gohan had also learned a lesson from Yi Tian in the game. For a sword mistress like Yi Tian, she would probably only feel that you were her master if you treated her sincerely. Therefore, Gohan had specially bought various brands of wine at the entrance. If you wanted to treat Yi Tian well, you just had to buy wine for her. Yi Tian drank the bottle of kvass in one go. She felt that it was not enough and wanted to ask Gohan for another bottle. In the end, before Yi Tian could say anything, a brand new bottle of kvass was delivered to her. Good brother! Yi Tian was extremely touched. She forcefully punched Gohan's chest. From the moment we entered, you've been my scoundrel friend. She called him her scoundrel friend in front of her scoundrel friend. Etion was really a scoundrel friend. While Gohan and Etion were interacting and trying to get closer to each other, Song Yifei had just finished synchronizing. A ball of light emerged from Song Yifei's stomach. After some transformation, a little nun suddenly appeared. Oh, that's right. A little nun had indeed appeared. She wore a monk's robe and carried a long sword on her back. She also wore a nun's hat on her head. She looked like a nun through and through. But after thinking about it carefully, this was very normal. A sword mistress dressed like a nun. What was so strange about that? The only thing that made people curious was that the nun's hat covered most of her head. It was unknown if there was hair under the hat or if she was completely bald. Ba. This poor nun, Bo Ri, pays her respects to Lord Swordsman. So this sword mistress was called Bo Ri, which meant Bo Ri sword. Even the name sounded very Buddhist. Ba. Hello. Immeasurable deity. Seeing the first sword mistress in his life, Song Yifei had mixed feelings. He had finally become a swordsman. He didn't think that the turning point of his life would come so suddenly and catch him unprepared. Tsk, little nun, seeing this heroine, why aren't you saluting? Etion's face was a little red after drinking a top-grade kvass. She looked like she wanted to cause trouble. Ba. Benefactor Etion, this poor nun salutes you. Hearing Etion say this sword mistress called Bo Ri also very naturally saluted Etion. She was very well behaved. There was no fault to be found in her behavior. When did this little nun's personality change? Etion couldn't help but be surprised when he saw how obedient Bo Ri was. This little nun's temper wasn't like this in the past. Ba. Being locked up in this sunless underground place by benefactor Etion, no matter how fiery one's temper is, it will still be worn down. During these past few hundred years, I've been comprehending the Buddhist Dharma in my dreams and have already comprehended the essence of the Buddhist Tao. I won't bother about this grudge with benefactor Etion anymore. When Hanya spoke, she had a look of great enlightenment. However, the information contained in her words shocked everyone. From what Bo Ri said, it seemed that Etion had imprisoned her here. Thinking about it carefully, didn't Etion imprison Bo Ri? Under normal circumstances, Bo Ri should have been placed in a public place for those who were fated to come here to choose from. However, Etion placed Bo Ri in an underground secret room and didn't tell anyone about it. Thus, Bo Ri had been hidden underground for more than 700 years. Wasn't this a disguised form of imprisonment? If luck was on her side, she could have appeared 10 times in these 700 years. Boring. When I helped you release him, I still wanted you to fight with me again. Who would have thought that your personality would actually change now? Boring, really boring. Etion shook his head. In this day and age, it's so difficult to find an evenly matched opponent. Ba. Sword Tao is a minor Tao. Buddhism is the true Tao. Bo Ri didn't care about the dust on the surface. If benefactor Etion wants to spar, you should find someone else. Forgive me for not keeping you company. Bo Ri directly rejected. Pavilion Master, if I remember correctly, Lady Etion's swordsmanship is ranked first among treasured swords and third among famed swords. This Bo Ri sword is actually comparable to Lady Etion's swordsmanship. Doesn't that mean that the Bo Ri sword is ranked third among famed swords? She's just an ancient sword maiden. A spirit sword wielder asked Lu Lei. He couldn't understand. Among the ancient sword maidens, was there a sword maiden that could match up to the heavenly sword? Bo Ri sword. Lu Lei didn't answer the spirit sword wielder's question. He fell into deep thought. The name Bo Ri sword had evoked some information from the depths of his memory. In the vast amount of information in Sword Pavilion, there was very little information about the Bo Ri sword. It was to the extent that Lu Lei had to recall it for over 10 minutes before he could recall it. Bo Ri sword. I see. Chapter 293. In Lu Lei's memory, there was a story about Prajna. Legend has it that before the heaven-shrouding Sword Emperor became a Sword Emperor and was still a heaven-shrouding Sword Immortal, he and another Sword Immortal had no choice but to fight. This was because Zhetian Jiandi's celestial sword was the Yuan Killer Sword, and the other Sword Immortal's celestial sword was the Avicii Sword. The Yuan Killer Sword and the Avicii Sword were one. If Zhetian wanted to become an Emperor Sword wielder, he had to obtain the Avicii Sword and combine the two swords into one to become an Emperor Sword wielder. At that time, humanity was in the midst of the first difficult sword era. Any immortal sword wielder was a valuable combat force. Heaven-shrouding Sword Immortal and another Sword Immortal agreed to have 3 matches at the peak of Sanqing Mountain. Each side would send out 3 sword maidens of the same level to fight one-on-one. The one who won 2 battles would be the final winner. The loser would allow the other to cut the sword mark of the celestial sword without resistance. The 2 sides didn't inform anyone of this battle, so naturally, no one went to watch. Later generations only knew that after they fought for 5 days at the peak of Sanqing Mountain, Zhetian's sword returned to Yanjing City with the Yuan Killer Sword and the Avicii Sword. He fought with Yuan Ko for 49 days. On the last day, he combined the 2 swords and became an emperor in battle. He became the 3rd human Jiandi. He killed the universe-level Yuan Ko and the universe-level Yuan Ko, which scared the Yuan Ko away. They didn't dare to go near Yanjing City for the next 10 years. Later on, in order to quell the first difficult sword era, the heaven-shrouding Sword Emperor directly rushed to the Eastern Heavenly Court and killed the master of the Heavenly Court at that time, the desolate grade Yuaning, Eastern Sovereign Tai Yi, with his sword. The world trembled because of this, and the Eastern Heavenly Court even closed the Southern Heavenly Gate for 40 years. They only dared to come out after the heaven-shrouding Sword Emperor ascended. Zhetian Jiandi's glorious life was celebrated by many, but there was no news of the Sword Immortal who fought with Zhetian Jiandi for 5 days and 5 nights. In the end, even his name and title were never passed down. It was a tragedy. But after Zhetian Jiandi established Yuzhong headquarters city, he wrote a memoir of less than 3,000 words. This essay had never been made public, and only the Sword Immortals of Yuzhong had the right to read it. No one else knew of its existence. In the prose, it was mentioned that this Sword Immortal had an ancient sword-class Buddhist sword maiden so powerful that even heaven-shrouding Jiandi was left speechless. Its name was the Wisdom Sword. The original text of his recollections was like this: "If I did not rely on heaven to fight to the death, I would not be able to defeat Prajna, and then I would no longer have the name of covering the sky in this world." If one fully understood the meaning of this sentence, it meant that if it wasn't for the heavenly sword fighting to the death, then heaven-covering Jiandi would have been defeated by Hanya. If Prajna won, then the one who lost the duel would be Zhetian Jiandi. From then on, the name Zhetian Jiandi would no longer exist. When Lu Lei first read this essay, he didn't understand why Heavenly Reliance was able to defeat Hanya in a desperate battle. The Heavenly Sword was clearly a treasured sword maiden, while Hanya was only an ancient sword maiden. The 2 sword maidens were not even on the same level. Unless the wielder of the Prajna sword was out of his mind, he wouldn't let his ancient sword lady fight against the number 1 treasure sword, the Heavenly Sword. However, from the meaning behind Heavenly Reliance's words, it seemed that Heavenly Reliance had indeed fought against the Great Wisdom Sword, and Heavenly Reliance had emerged victorious in the end. In that case, didn't that mean that a mere ancient sword-ranked Great Wisdom Sword really had the strength to rival the first treasured sword? In that case, wouldn't the Great Wisdom Sword replace the Celestial Sword on the spot and become the number 1 ancient sword-ranked Great Wisdom Sword? However, all of these were just guesses. Perhaps only Tian and Bo Ri, who were present at the scene, knew the truth. Amit Baife, let's go. I don't want to stay here anymore. It's too noisy here. Help me build a temple so I can have some peace. After speaking, Hanya walked out of the sword pavilion. Song Yifei originally wanted to say a few more words to Gohan and Heavenly Reliance to thank them for their help. However, it seemed that it was impossible now. Song Yifei could only bow to Gohan and Heavenly Reliance before following Hanya out of the sword pavilion. Seems like little nun Hanya's temper hasn't changed. She's still so petty. Heavenly Reliance looked at Hanya's robes that were fluttering in the wind and revealed a smile. After more than 700 years of rest, it seems like Lady Hanya has learned to endure more. Gohan stood next to Heavenly Reliance and placed a bottle of kvass in her hands. How about it? Is there anything else you want to do here? If not, let's go home. Go home. Hearing these two words, Heavenly Reliance's expression changed. In the end, she shook her head and sighed. I don't have a home. To me, no matter how good a home is, it can't compare to a shabby wine shop. Then I'll build a wine shop for you. Gohan looked into Heavenly Reliance's eyes and said calmly. All right. Heavenly Reliance thought about it and drank another bottle of kvass. Give me a few thousand bottles of this and put them in the wine shop. These two sword ladies, one wanted a temple and the other wanted a wine shop. In a sense, they were a perfect match. It's here, it's here. Yi Si shifted her gaze to Fleeting Ling and Su Tianyuan, who were leading a group of swordsmen, surrounded a barren rock on Changyang Mountain. Fleeting Ling, who looked like a scientist, had a strange helmet on his head. There were wires connected to the helmet, and at the other end of the wires was a machine the size of a car. Dr. Fan, are you sure it's here? Su Tianyuan found it hard to hide the excitement in his heart. After working hard for a few nights and being afraid for a few nights, he finally found the location of that thing. The scientist excitedly said, It's right, there's no mistake. When my strong ion signal passed through this rock, it encountered an extremely powerful resistance. This means that there must be an item that can isolate the strong ion signal here. In this world, aside from that thing, there is nothing else. Good. 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 Even with Su Tianyuan's shrewdness, he still said good 3 times. It seemed like he valued the item here very much. Suddenly, Liu Ling blurted out, "Tch, why did I hear that apart from that thing, there is another item that can isolate your strong ion signal?" When the scientist heard this, his expression changed drastically. As a scientist, even though he knew that this lady had an extraordinary background, he still had to refute her loudly. That's impossible. In this world, apart from that thing, what else can block my signal? There is no such thing in this world. Tisk Tsk, you are really confident. Then let me ask you, can your strong ion signal pass through a dimensional rift? Liu Ling asked with a face full of smiles. Then, the scientist instantly became speechless. Liu Ling was right. His strong ion signal could not possibly penetrate a dimensional rift. All right, Ling, I know you don't want to come here with me, and I didn't want to bring you here. If it wasn't for Uncle Lu Nian's secret order to bring you along, I wouldn't have bothered to bring you here. I would have let you stay with that man of yours. Su Tianyuan smiled bitterly. Even so, you don't have to be so sarcastic to Professor Fan. Everyone knows that dimensional rifts can intercept strong ions, or rather, all ion quarks cannot escape from dimensional rift. However, how can a dimensional rift exist within a mountain wall? Who knows what is going on in this world? Liu Ling said this and did not say anything else. She also knew that her previous rebuttal was purely unreasonable. Her patience had been worn out after such a long period of time. In comparison, arguing with that brat Gohan was much more interesting. Do it. After appeasing Liu Ling, Su Tianyuan ordered his subordinates to take action. A few sword-bearers in the form of sword ladies inserted their swords into the rocks. These sword-bearers were all treasure sword-bearers. Although the treasure sword ladies in their hands were man-made, they were more than enough to deal with these rocks. Then, as if they were cutting tofu, the rocks were sliced off one by one. In less than a few minutes, the huge rock was cut into a cave that could accommodate 2 people walking side by side at the same time. Dr. Fan kept looking at the data on the instrument and said, "Soon, soon, it's just in front." In a moment of excitement, it was inevitable that some people would let their guard down. For example, the sword-bearers in front of them were tasked with cutting down the mountain wall in front of them and passing it to the sword-bearers behind him. However, when he looked at the rock in front of him and turned around to pass it to the sword-bearers behind him, suddenly, a big hairy palm reached out from the hole he had just cut and hit the sword-bearer's neck. The unlucky sword-bearer's protective shield instantly shattered. He did not even have time to summon a sword lady before his neck was broken by the black beast. His head tilted to one side and he died. Second bro, what happened to you, second bro?" Everything happened so quickly that the other sword-bearer, who was a brother to the dead sword-bearer, did not even see what happened. As a result, he made a huge mistake. He did not escape immediately, but chose to pull the fallen sword-bearer. As a result, a few seconds later, the black hand that attacked once again broke his neck. In an instant, Su Tianyuan's team lost 2 sword-bearers who were at the level of treasured swords. Danger, retreat, retreat. The rest of the sword-bearers finally reacted and escaped from the hole like a tide. Su Tianyuan and Liu Nianling, who were observing from the outside, realized that something was wrong. They ordered the remaining sword-bearers to release their sword ladies and set up a formation. Then, they surrounded the hole that had taken the lives of the 2 sword-bearers. Awoo! Su Tianyuan's face was instantly covered in sweat when he heard such a loud roar coming from the hole. "My dear Miss Ling, what kind of mouth is that? Why is there a meteor-grade earth bear in there?" Chapter 294. Deep into the night, Gohan was meditating alone in the training room. His body had been remodeled, and he needed to reopen the meridians that had been remodeled in order to recover his original fighting strength. This was a task that Gohan had to complete with all his might. Before he recovered his strength, Gohan did not plan on leaving the city to fight with Yuan Ko. According to Gohan's estimation, this process would take about a month. Compared to his first time cultivating for more than 10 years, this 1 month was already very fast. Let us live freely in the world of mortals. Ride a horse and share the prosperity of the world. Sing the joy in our hearts to wine, and enjoy our youth with vigor. Just as Gohan was about to reopen the meridian in his feet and was about to reopen the next meridian, a ghostly wail came from next door. "I'll endure it." Gohan frowned and planned to ignore this voice. Unfortunately, this voice did not know how to restrain itself. Instead, it became louder and louder. Gradually, it was as if the entire roof was going to collapse. Gohan might be able to endure this kind of voice, but others might not. After the voice wreaked havoc for a while, Gohan's door began to knock madly. In this era where technology was so advanced, knocking on the door was no longer a traditional way of life. If you wanted to enter a stranger's house, you could do it through the convenient neighbor communication system. For someone to knock on Gohan's door like this, it meant that the person must be in a very angry state. As expected, when Gohan opened the door, he saw a few angry faces. Gohan's neighbors from several floors had all come. They came to knock on Gohan's door for no other reason than to complain to Gohan about the ghostly wail. These neighbors were very friendly and said that if they did not want to be reported to the discipline committee, they should quickly shut up. After sending these crazy neighbors away, Gohan could only helplessly walk into a room. He saw Tian alone, holding a microphone and screaming at the television screen. If voices could kill, then Tian would have already killed everyone on the entire floor. "Gohan, you're here. Have a drink with Chinpin." Suddenly, a small body jumped into Gohan's arms, and the smell of alcohol assaulted Gohan's breath. Gohan lowered his head and saw a blushing little Chinpin looking at Gohan with a silly smile. Her whole body was hot and obviously she was drunk. Let us be free and unrestrained with joy in our hearts. Even in her drunken state, Qingpin skillfully climbed onto Gohan's neck, then sat on it and sang loudly with her immature voice. Logically speaking, Qingpin's singing was much better than Etion's, even if Qingpin's off-key was even worse than Etion's. Gohan walked to Etion's side in 2 or 3 steps, pressed the remote control, and the whole world instantly became quiet. What are you doing? Are you rebelling? Etion saw that Gohan had turned off her television, and immediately became anxious. Without the lyrics and music accompaniment, how was she going to sing? You've already disturbed the people. If you don't want to be locked up in the discipline committee's jail with me, then I'll have to trouble Lady Etion to rest for a while. Gohan said expressionlessly. TSK, the discipline committee's jail was built by this heroine. I've left more than 10 secret doors in there. If I go in today, I can slip out tomorrow. What's there to be afraid of? Etion said disdainfully. I'm very sorry, Lady Etion. The discipline committee's jail was already destroyed during the last difficult sword era. If you live in there now, I guarantee that you won't be able to find the secret door even after a year. That's right, that place was built purely with dimensional crystals. Before I reach spirit sword rank, you won't be able to come out. How about this? This is more troublesome. Why don't we find a chance to talk to the neighbors, and let them sing to their heart's content with me, and form a community singing group? Etion thought of a seemingly good idea. If that's the case, the entire district will ask to lock us in there. A few black lines appeared on Gohan's forehead. What a bummer. Etion yawned, then hugged Kvass and took another big gulp. This little loli of yours is really useless. She's drunk like this in less than a bottle of Kvass. I was planning to groom her to become my successor. Imagining Qingpin turning into Etion, Gohan couldn't help but shiver. He had to think of a way to restrict Etion, or else the whole house would be turned into a puddle of dirty water by Etion. It was also at this time that a message was sent to Gohan's personal terminal. It was sent by Bright Moon from back then, and it said very simply, Gohan, do you have time? My brother wants to see you in the game. Seeing this message, Gohan had an idea. Etion, I want to go into the game for a while. Do you want to go in with me? Gohan asked. Game? What's that? Can I go in? Then I want to go in and take a look. As expected, when she heard something new, Etion couldn't suppress her curiosity. As long as Etion entered the game, it would be easy. In the game, Etion could sing whatever she wanted, and it wouldn't affect anyone. He handed the drunk little drunkard Qingpin to Wenmeiyun and asked her to take care of Qingpin while he slept. However, Wenmeiyun was also very busy. Tonight, Gu Yun sneaked into the fish tank while Gohan was meditating. In the end, she knocked over the fish tank and the entire kitchen was in a mess. Seeing that Wenmeiyun, who was sweating profusely, hadn't finished cleaning up the mess in the kitchen, Gohan suddenly felt that it was time to add a helper to Wenmeiyun. Anyway, he had already become a sword wielder. Not only could he go to the maid center to get an exclusive maid, but it seemed like he could also change to a bigger house. Forget it, he would think about these things in the future. It was better to enter the game first. When Gohan opened his eyes again, he was already in the game. Gohan set the online location to be his bedroom, but why was Queen Yu lying on his bed? Seeing Queen Yu sleeping soundly on his bed, Gohan's heart ached. At this moment, Queen Yu was lying on his bed. She wasn't covered with a blanket, and her pajamas weren't neatly worn either. A large area of her snow-white skin was exposed. If Gohan adjusted his angle, he could even see Queen Yu's pair of white rabbit. Alright, it seemed to be a little off-topic. The reason why Gohan's heart ached was because of the 2 tear stains on Queen Yu's cheeks. She probably cried to sleep. Why was she crying? Was it because he hadn't gone online to see her for more than a week? In fact, he had returned to the city the night before yesterday, which meant that he could go online the night before yesterday. However, because of Gu Yun and Qinpin, Gohan threw the contents of the game to the side and didn't consider the in-game Queen Yu. "Gohan, I'm going to kill you," Queen Yu muttered in the dream, "but why does killing you hurt so much? I won't kill you, okay?" Sigh, it seems like the famed sword girl can only give up on the 3-foot sword. Hearing Queen Yu's words, Gohan silently made this decision. According to Gohan's original plan, the famed sword girl should have synchronized with the number 1 famed sword, the 3-foot sword, just like the number 1 treasured sword, the heavenly sword. However, seeing Queen Yu like this, if he chose the 3-foot sword in real life, Queen Yu would definitely go crazy. Gohan smiled bitterly. What damned 3-foot sword? He didn't care. He had to make up for the sins he committed. Back then, he killed Kenzu with 1 strike and used the grafting technique to snatch Queen Yu from him. Now, it was time for him to return the favor. Gohan sat next to Queen Yu and caressed her white and tender face. A certain lock in his heart was suddenly released. Originally, the balance in Gohan's heart was infinitely tilted towards revenge and darkness. But now, this balance was balanced. On the other side of the balance was a pile of sword girls. Gohan was no longer the Gohan of the past. The original Gohan would only make the choice that was most beneficial to him. Now, Gohan would only make the choice that was most beneficial to his sword girl. Perhaps this was growth. Gohan, what's going on? Why are there so many strange things in my head? Gohan thought to himself. I actually wanted to woo an ugly guy with a face full of scars. How strange. After Tian entered the game with Gohan, she felt that there were a lot of memories in her head. These memories were so inexplicable, and they were all about an ugly person with a face full of scars. This made Tian feel that she couldn't accept it. She was clearly a senior member of the Appearance Association. This is normal. It's a basic phenomenon of retrieving consciousness fragment. Is there a problem? Gohan turned around and looked at Tian strangely. Why is an ugly guy like you here? Gohan had been giving Tian his back, but when he turned around, his face was full of scars. Tian was shocked. Wasn't this that disgusting, ugly guy with scars? Ugly guy. Gohan realized that Tian was probably referring to the scars on his face. Gohan touched the scars on his face. The knot in his heart had been resolved. Perhaps it was time to remove these scars. This wouldn't do. His face in the game was exactly the same as his face in real life. There were no adjustments. Once he removed the scars, he would probably be exposed in real life. It was better to forget about it. I'm your sword wielder, Gohan. I just made some changes to myself in the game. Oh, now I'm called military governor. Don't call me by the wrong name. Gohan glanced at Tian. What? Heroine Tian is afraid of a face with scars? How is that possible? Tian said heavily. It's just too ugly. You'll have to slowly get used to it. Gohan snorted coldly. Alright, I don't care about that. Let me ask you. Why are there so many strange memories in my mind after entering the game? What the hell is this place? This is the game world. Those memories are fragments of your consciousness. How could you not know this? Didn't you split those fragments of consciousness on your own accord? Gohan's words were stuck at this point. He realized a huge problem. Sword Maiden Online was created 200 years ago, and Tian's first awakening was something that happened 350 years ago. Tian was just like her performance. She didn't even know that there was such a thing as Sword Maiden Online in this world, because in these 200 years, Tian had always been sleeping in Jiang'a. Then the problem was, how did the fragments of Tian's consciousness appear in the game world? Did she see a ghost? Chapter 295. Tian swore that he had been in a deep sleep for the past 350 years and had not woken up at all. Therefore, it was impossible for him to split a fragment of his consciousness. That was impossible. However, Gu-han didn't believe this. The game had been released 200 years ago, and the fragments of consciousness in the game had truly come from Heavenly Sword's soul. The moment the fragments of consciousness entered Heavenly Sword's body was proof. If it didn't come from Heavenly Sword's own consciousness, then it was impossible for it to enter Heavenly Sword's consciousness. One insisted that she hadn't woken up for 350 years, while the other had Etion's consciousness fragments. This was a very interesting thing. There must be something interesting going on. Gu-han had a guess. Etion had woken up once in the past 350 years, but for some reason, she had deleted all her memories of waking up. This was not impossible. If she encountered something that she didn't want to remember in a lifetime, then before she fell into a deep sleep, the Sword Lady could delete all her memories of that lifetime. It was just like formatting a computer, very convenient. Alright, Gu-han would definitely look into the things inside. There were some things that were better off not knowing than knowing. How is it? Have you sorted out those memories? Etion sat on the chair. This was her sorting out Etion's memories in the game. This was the first time Gu-han saw Etion so quiet since he knew her. Yes, everything's sorted out. So this is how the game world works. Etion smiled curiously. This was the first time she understood the game world of Sword Lady Online. To her, everything in this world was so novel. Hey Gu-han, let's go and clear the dungeon. After Etion understood this world, she couldn't wait to clear the dungeon. This was very normal. It was like a player who had just bought a phone and couldn't help but install a lot of apps in it. Etion, why are you so noisy? You're killing me. Whether it was in the game or in reality, Etion's voice was always the loudest. During the few days that Gu-han wasn't around, Yuang deeply understood this point. So she cursed in dissatisfaction and got up from the bed indifferently. As a result, Gu-han was instantly dumbfounded. Yuang's lower body was completely bare under the blanket. She was only wearing a shirt. Other than that, there was nothing else. Yuang didn't notice that Gu-han was beside her, so she wanted to kick Etion's head. In the end, the beautiful scene between her legs flashed in Gu-han's eyes. Immediately, Gu-han felt his mouth go dry, and his entire body was burning with desire. Although his body had been reconstructed, and the meridians of the 9 swords of mysterious heaven had to be reopened, the 3 green lotus swords that he had practiced for a period of time did not seem to be affected at all. Yuang, what happened just now? Gu-han wanted to tell Yuang not to take it to heart, but before he could finish, Yuang suddenly raised his head and stared at Gu-han's face, gritting his teeth as he said, "Nothing happened just now, you didn't see anything." "What did you say? What happened just now?" "I just entered the game." Gu-han took advantage of the situation and continued Yuang's words. Although he looked like an ostrich doing this, Yuang let out a sigh of relief. As long as he didn't say anything, he would probably forget about it. Yuang thought to himself, "Okay, let me get down to business. Etion just entered the game world and wants to experience the instance dungeon, so I plan to meet up with Yaoguang later. I'll bring you guys to a small instance dungeon, so prepare yourselves." Gu-han said. Just entered the game? Yuang didn't understand. Why did Etion just enter the game? She was a sword maiden in the game, how could she leave the game? "Oh Yuang, I forgot to tell you. I've already become a treasured sword wielder in the real world, and I've successfully synchronized with Etion in the real world. What you see now isn't the original Etion, but the Etion that has fused with the consciousness fragment. So that's how it is." When Yuang heard this, his hands started to tremble. "I clearly came first." "What do you mean?" Gu-han was stunned. Yuang's "clearly came first" was a bit strange. What did she come first? "I clearly came first." Yuang kept repeating this sentence in his heart. She clearly became Gu-han's sword maiden first, and Etion clearly came later than her. But why did Etion meet up with Gu-han in the real world first, while she was still waiting in the game? She clearly came first. Thinking of this, Yu Wang's heart was in so much pain that he wished he was dead. Sigh, she didn't even think about it. She was a famous sword maiden. Before Gohan synchronized with a treasured sword, he wouldn't be able to synchronize with her no matter what. Yu Wang, are you alright? Tian, who had fused with the consciousness fragments, could roughly guess what Yu Wang was thinking. She giggled and asked Tian, "That's right, let me tell you, Gohan is really handsome in the real world. His face is so white, just looking at him makes me want to kiss him." Alright, Tian's suicidal words completely ignited a certain chord in Yu Wang's heart. She suddenly stood up. "Gohan, I'm not feeling well today. You and Tian go do dungeons, I'll stay at home and not go anywhere." With that, Yu Wang ran away. He was about to end up like those melodramatic dramas. Unfortunately, Gohan didn't like these useless dramas. Before Yu Wang could run out of the hall, Gohan's heart moved. "Yu Wang, come back." Yu Wang's running moans stopped, and then her feet involuntarily retreated, until she retreated in front of Gohan. "Yu Wang, sit down," Gohan ordered again. Then, Yu Wang sat on Gohan's lap. "You're not allowed to stay anywhere today. You're coming with me to the dungeon." Gohan paused and saw that Yu Wang's face was still ashen and miserable. Her body was also very stiff. It seemed like she was still resisting Gohan's orders. Helpless, Gohan added, "Without you, the dungeon doesn't have any meaning." Hearing Gohan say this, King Yu's body softened. His body was no longer stiff, his face was no longer pale, and his mouth was no longer tightly shut. Thousands of words converged into one sentence. Annoying. Don't misunderstand, these words weren't said by King Yu, but by Tian. She couldn't stand the lovey-dovey couple in front of her anymore. She walked out of the hall with large strides and left behind these harsh words. "I'll give you guys 10 minutes. If you don't come out in 10 minutes, I'll go play in the dungeon by myself. You can't do anything by yourself. Without my control, you won't even be able to leave this sword tomb." Gohan silently retorted. "Let's go now. How could Queen Yu have the face to stay here for another 10 minutes? She immediately stood up from Gohan's body and chased after Tian. Annoying. Guess who said that hateful sentence? Chapter 296. Before going to the dungeon, Gohan had to make a trip to Yaoguang. A few minutes after Gohan entered the game, Yaoguang's invitation was sent to Gohan's personal terminal. Clearly, he had a very strong need for Gohan. The adjective was not quite right. Therefore, after appeasing King Yu and Heavenly, Gohan brought the two of them to Yaoguang's encampment. Heavenly had no interest in such a dirty deal, so she forcefully dragged King Yu to the tavern in the encampment for a drink. Therefore, Gohan entered Yaoguang's meeting room alone. It was the same meeting room that he had talked to Yaoguang after clearing the dungeon. At this time, Yaoguang was already waiting in the meeting room. Looking at the empty teacup in front of Yaoguang, it seemed that Yaoguang had been waiting for Gohan for a long time. Did sect leader Yaoguang wait for a long time? Gohan sat opposite Yaoguang and asked with a smile. "It's alright, it's only been an hour." Yaoguang replied without changing his expression. "Looks like sect leader Yaoguang has been very relaxed recently. It's my honor that you can wait for me for an hour." After Gohan finished speaking, two NPC maidservants placed a cup of tea in front of Gohan and filled Yaoguang's cup. Gohan took a sip. "Let's skip the small talk. Sect leader Yaoguang asked me to come here in such a hurry. What's the matter?" "Our challenge with eternal autumn water has been brought forward." Yaoguang drank the tea that he had just poured. "Brought forward? Brought forward when?" According to the original plan, Yaoguang would challenge everlasting autumn water in a month's time. There were about 20 days left until then. "The day after tomorrow." Yaoguang was silent for a while, then spat out the time. "The day after tomorrow." Even with Gohan's shrewdness, he couldn't help but look surprised. What kind of joke was this? The original 1 month's time had been shortened by 20 days. This was equivalent to reducing the mobilization time and logistical preparation time of a large-scale war by more than half. If you reduce the mobilization time of World War I and World War II by half, let's see if Germany would be defeated. These 20 days were very important for Yaoguang's sword faction. They had to make plans, arrange manpower, and prepare various battle resources. In short, without these 20 days, Yaoguang's sword faction's chances of winning had dropped by at least 40%. Can't it be a few more days? The battle is going to start the day after tomorrow. Many of your sword faction members probably have their own plans or are not online at all. Whether you can gather half of your members by the day after tomorrow is a problem. Guhan couldn't help but remind Yaoguang. I have no choice. The battle has to start the day after tomorrow. If possible, I would even like to start the battle tomorrow. Yaoguang looked helpless. It was obvious that he wasn't prepared for such an outcome. He hadn't expected it. Did something happen? Seeing Yaoguang's expression, Guhan knew that Yaoguang was forced to make such a decision. How could a smart person like him do such a stupid thing? Take a guess. Yaoguang suddenly wanted to keep him in suspense and play the traditional game of you guess with Guhan. It was probably because Guhan had directly seen through his plan to challenge Everlasting Autumn Water's position as one of the 10 great sects last time, so he felt a little unreconciled and wanted to regain some face and so on. Childish. Guhan snorted coldly. The word childish made Yaoguang feel embarrassed. Damn it, this is indeed a little childish. Forget it, childish it is. If you, military governor, can't guess it, I can at least feel better. However, guessing and whatnot had always been Guhan's forte. There's nothing to guess. You suddenly brought forward the time of attack. It's nothing more than a sudden change that forced you to bring forward the time. Guhan analyzed slowly. Such a change can only come from 2 possibilities. Either your Yaoguang sword faction has become weaker, or Everlasting Autumn Water has become stronger. On my way here, I noticed that there are a lot more people in your Yaoguang sword faction than before. The members' faces are also filled with excitement. It seems that because of the first clear of the Instance dungeon and the defeat of Great Waves, your sword faction has gained a lot of new blood. Right now, Yaoguang's sword faction should be on the rise. It's impossible for their strength to decline. Then, the problem lies with Everlasting Autumn Water. Everlasting Autumn Water must have become stronger as well. If a sword faction wants to become stronger, the simplest way is to add a large number of experts. Given the complicated relationship between the Eternal Autumn Water and the Great Waves of Storm's founder, it was normal for the Great Waves of Storm to lend Eternal Autumn Water a hand at a critical moment. Moreover, the Great Waves of Storm's victory was built on the Great Waves of Storm's failure. The Great Waves of Storm wanted revenge, even in his dreams. And the best way for them to take revenge on Yaoguang's sword faction is to make you fail this challenge and make you spit out everything you got from them. So, I think you should have noticed that a large number of experts from Great Waves of Storm have started to withdraw from Great Waves of Storm sword faction. Great Waves of Storm sword faction is famous for being difficult to join. It's not normal for so many experts to withdraw. The higher-ups of Great Waves of Storm sword faction must have given the order for these experts to withdraw from the faction. Then, they will have to let these experts join Everlasting Autumn Water. That way, Everlasting Autumn Water's strength will skyrocket to the point where your Yaoguang sword faction will not be able to defeat them. Fortunately, there is a 72-hour cooldown period after withdrawing from the sect. Those experts will have to wait for 72 hours before they can join Everlasting Autumn Water. These 72 hours are your only chance. If you can't defeat Everlasting Autumn Water within these 72 hours, your Yaoguang sword faction will have no chance of defeating Everlasting Autumn Water at all. Oh right. This 72-hour cooldown period starts from the moment those experts withdraw from the sect. I don't know when they did that, but it's clear that you no longer have 72 hours. If that's the case, I'm afraid you can't wait to challenge everlasting autumn water right now, right? Starting the battle the day after tomorrow should be the time you calculated several times, right? You must have omitted all the time that you could possibly spare to obtain the most optimal time. In other words, when the time comes, you will only have around 30 hours to truly challenge everlasting autumn water. That's quite a tight schedule. Yaoguang, you sure have a big heart. It's truly beyond my expectations. Guhan went through the series of analysis without pausing, scaring Yaoguang so much that he nearly dropped the teacup in his hand. Military Governor, are you even human? Yaoguang's face looked as though he had just seen a ghost. Looks like I guessed right. Tell me, then, what's the exact situation? I'm all ears. Guhan shut his mouth and waited for Yaoguang to speak. Hee, does this count as me asking to be humiliated? Yaoguang sighed. You guessed right. 2 hours ago, I received information from an insider in Great Waves of Ocean Wave. Approximately 5,000 elite sword-bearers had withdrawn from Yaoguang's sword sect at the same time. At first, I couldn't understand it. It was only when I linked it to everlasting autumn water that I realized it. My plan to challenge everlasting autumn water must have been leaked, or perhaps it wasn't leaked at all. Wonderbrush really knows me better than anyone. He must have guessed that I would be interested in everlasting autumn water. When Yaoguang mentioned Wonderbrush, his tone was rather subtle. This former enemy of Yaoguang's sword sect had now become Yaoguang's strongest enemy. If I were you, I would give up on this challenge. Guhan ignored the ugly expression on Yaoguang's face when he heard this. If Great Waves of Ocean Waves only wanted to support everlasting autumn water, there would be no need for them to make such a big fuss. The best way would be to arrange for a small number of their members to withdraw from the sect and enter everlasting autumn water every day. As long as they enter everlasting autumn water silently, unless your insider has become a high-level character, it would be impossible for them to discover such information. But now, Great Waves of Ocean Waves is doing the exact opposite, arranging for 5,000 people to withdraw in such a big fuss. This means that Great Waves of Ocean Waves is doing this on purpose for you to see, to tell you, Yaoguang, that I'm going to support everlasting autumn water. You only have 72 hours left. If you don't act now, you will never have the chance to challenge everlasting autumn water. Guhan continued to analyze. Great Waves of Ocean Waves is forcing you to make a choice. Are you going to attack within 72 hours, or are you going to give up on your ambitions for everlasting autumn water? If you give up on your ambitions, then Great Waves of Ocean Waves will be able to protect everlasting autumn water and achieve their basic goal. If you make the first move, then that would be even better. Since ancient times, other than Great Waves of Ocean Waves itself, there has never been a sword sect that could end a sect challenge in a mere 30 hours. If you really do that, Yaoguang, you will be courting death. Once the original members of Everlasting Autumn Water survive these 30 hours, and the main force from Great Waves of Ocean Waves joins Everlasting Autumn Water, then you will be completely finished. Everything that your sect has accumulated for over 10 years will all be in the hands of Everlasting Autumn Water. Oh, that's right. If I were Ogenu and Ogenu of Great Waves of Ocean Waves, then I would arrange for a few of my top experts to withdraw from Great Waves of Ocean Waves' sword sect and join Everlasting Autumn Water. That would at least increase Everlasting Autumn Water's battle prowess by half. That way, it would be even more impossible for you to defeat Everlasting Autumn Water. This is actually a rather simple trap. They are using the 72-hour time limit to force you, Yaoguang, to make a risky decision. Once you step in, Great Waves of Ocean Waves will have tens of thousands of ways to crush you to death in front of Everlasting Autumn Water. So, if I were you, I would definitely not have any designs on Everlasting Autumn Water. That is simply courting death. Gohan's words were like a bucket of ice water that was poured over Yao Guang's head, causing Yao Guang to be completely dumbfounded. The latter part of what Gohan had said was something that Yao Guang had never thought of. He had thought that this was merely great waves of ocean waves operation to support everlasting autumn water. He had never expected that there would be such a huge trap hidden within. Once he jumped into it, he would most likely be consigned to eternal damnation. But, Yao Guang's expression was filled with conflict and hatred. Finally, Yao Guang closed his eyes and his expression returned to a calm state. There are no buts. I have to take down everlasting autumn water. If I can't, I would rather the entire Yao Guang sword sect be reduced to dust and cease to exist. Yao Guang revealed a rarely seen vicious expression. Since sect leader Yao Guang has already made up his mind, I won't try to persuade you anymore. Goodbye. As a military governor, I do not wish to get involved in this mess. Gohan stood up and was about to leave. Help me. You must have a way to help me, right? Yao Guang appeared in a flash and blocked Gohan's way. Whatever request you have, I will agree to it. As long as you are willing to help me this once. Any conditions? Gohan raised his brows and sent a text to Yao Guang through his communicator. After reading the text, Yao Guang did not even frown as he replied, "Sure, I agree to your request. You really aren't a good person, Yao Guang. I've thought so from the start." Gohan did not expect Yao Guang to agree so readily. He glared at Yao Guang and said, "All right, hand over the command of the challenge the day after tomorrow to me. I have 60% confidence to help you win this challenge." "Sure. Including me, Yao Guang, everyone in Yao Guang's sword sect will listen to your command, military governor. From now on you, military governor, will be the deputy sect leader of my Yao Guang sword sect." It's a good thing that I forgot to leave Yao Guang's sword sect after completing the mission. Otherwise, I would have to wait for 72 hours to. Gohan shook his head and turned to leave the meeting room. That's right. The only person who could grasp your personality and set up such a trap for you is probably that guy. This time, I'm going to turn from a teammate to an opponent. This is really interesting. I'm looking forward to it. Chapter 297. After leaving the Yao Guang sword sect, Gohan decided to spend the next day sorting out the matters regarding the Yao Guang sword sect's challenge. Now, the most important task was to bring Etion, the curious baby, into the dungeon. Gohan estimated the time and estimated that he could play for another 1 or 2 hours, which was just about the time needed to complete a small dungeon. Gohan arrived at the Yao Guang sword sect's dungeon transfer hub. This was a building unique to the sword sect. It could easily transfer the sword sect's players to the various dungeons. Players did not need to waste a lot of time going to the dungeon gates to enter the dungeon. This was a very good benefit for the sword sect's players. Clicking on the transfer page of the dungeon transfer hub, one would be able to see the dungeon tree page of Sword Maiden Online. Sword Maiden Online's dungeon system was like a huge tree that reached the heavens. There were countless branches extending from the trunk, and on top of each branch, there would be countless branches. These dungeons were all dungeons connected to one another. If one wanted to complete the later dungeons with richer rewards, they would need to complete the previous dungeons one by one. So far, Gohan's dungeon tree only showed that Gohan had completed 2 dungeons. One was the initial dungeon, and the other was the Wudong Peak dungeon. Some readers would ask, didn't he also complete the King Arthur's Betrayal dungeon? It was true that Gohan had indeed completed the King Arthur's Betrayal dungeon. However, when Gohan first cleared the King Arthur's Betrayal dungeon, the dungeon was in a hidden state. In other words, it did not require any prerequisite. That was why Gohan was able to join the dungeon. However, now that King Arthur's Betrayal had been added to the dungeon tree, it had become the top dungeon among the famed sword-level dungeons. If one wanted to challenge this dungeon, one would need to clear all 8 dungeons before this dungeon. Although Gohan was the first party leader to complete the King Arthur's Betrayal dungeon, it was useless. At that moment, the dungeon was still in an inactive state. Ignoring the famed sword-level instance dungeon, which was still very far away from Gohan, Gohan's target was the few instance dungeons that he could clear. The instance dungeon tree was made up of 6 instance dungeons. They were the Ancient Sword main storyline dungeon, King Yu Jian Jian, the Treasure Sword main storyline dungeon, Wudong Peak, the famed Sword main storyline dungeon, Yanjing Defense Battle, the Spirit Sword main storyline dungeon, Alps Battle, the Fairy Sword main storyline dungeon, Return to England, and the Emperor Sword main storyline dungeon, Riding into the Heavenly Court. In addition to these 6 main dungeons, there were a series of side dungeons that extended from the main dungeon. Each main dungeon was connected to 2 side dungeons, so Gohan had a total of 5 dungeons to choose from. However, Gohan did not intend to challenge the famed sword-level main storyline dungeon, Defense of Old Yanjing, because this dungeon required a lot of time. It would take at least 3 days to complete, and Gohan did not have that much time. These 4 instance dungeons and the side dungeons that were directly connected to the other main dungeons were known as first-round side dungeons. The side dungeons that were connected to first-round side dungeons were known as second-round side dungeons, and so on until there were end side dungeons. Gohan looked through the dungeons' information one by one. In the past 12 years, Gohan had spent most of his time researching the King of Yu's Gojian Sword dungeon. The rest of his time was spent researching the other main dungeons. Although Gohan understood these scattered side dungeons, he didn't know much about them. He was only slightly better than ordinary players who hadn't done their homework. Originally, Gohan's attention had been focused on the 2 treasured sword grade dungeons. After all, the base rewards of a treasured sword grade dungeon were double that of an ancient sword grade dungeon. However, when Gohan accidentally glanced at one of the ancient sword grade dungeons, he was shocked. Is this a side dungeon? Gohan found an interesting instance dungeon in the ancient sword grade dungeon. The rewards of this instance dungeon weren't much, but to the Heavenly Reliance, it was a very interesting instance dungeon. Originally, Gohan had thought that this instance dungeon would be in the 4th or 5th round. He hadn't expected it to be a side dungeon. There's nothing to hesitate about. This is it. Gohan made up his mind. He tapped on the instance dungeon, and an instance dungeon door opened. Gohan brought the Heavenly Reliance and the King of Yu and instantly disappeared into the instance dungeon door. System announcement. Player Military Governor, welcome to the Heroes Rise from Insignificance instance dungeon. Quest objective. Protect the youth I Ching and allow him to successfully reach the next Survivor Sanctuary. Please note that the more Yuan Ko I Ching kills personally, the higher the instance dungeon's rating will be. System announcement. Quest 1 has been updated. Skinny Youth. Find the youth I Ching, gain his trust, and become his friend. Is this the scenery of this world 700 years ago? When Gohan entered the instance dungeon, he saw endless yellow sand. Countless ruins were buried by this yellow sand. If Gohan hadn't known that this was the Jiangnan River town, Gohan would have thought that he had arrived at the edge of the Sahara Desert. Yes, this place filled with yellow sand used to be the Jiangnan River town where birds sang and flowers bloomed. It was located near the former suburbs of Suzhou. Unfortunately, this water town had become a desert. When the wind blew, the yellow sand would fill the sky. It was said that this was one of the most intense battlefields after the apocalypse. A few Egyptian deities wanted to transform this area into a desert like their hometown. In the end, halfway through the transformation, they were killed by Jiandi, who was passing by. Unfortunately, after the transformation of Suzhou, even Jiandi did not have the ability to restore this place to its original state. It was only after Yuzhong City was established that technology was used to slowly transform this desert back to its original state. However, before Yuzhong City was established, this area had always been a desert. However, this was the benefit of the desert. Even Yuan Ko could not stand such terrible living conditions. Other than the freaks of the Egyptian deities, there were probably not many Yuan Ko who would like to live in the desert. Therefore, this place had become a paradise for human survivors. Because it was too far away from the new Yanjing city, the survivors here did not have the mood or the ability to travel all the way to the new Yanjing city in search of some paradise. Instead, they chose to live in this place that even Yuan Ko did not want to stay in, struggling at death's door. According to the quest description, Gohan's first task was to find the young NPC I Ching. At this time, he should be living in a tribe nearby. Finding this tribe was not difficult. After all, this was only an ancient sword mode instance dungeon. It was an instance dungeon for players who had just completed the initial instance dungeon to further improve their abilities. Therefore, this kind of instance dungeon was relatively simple. The system did not set up so many traps like in King Arthur's Betrayal. As long as players obediently followed the instance dungeon's instructions, this instance dungeon would be very easy to complete. Finding I Ching's tribe was not difficult. This was because there were a series of footprints near where Gohan had appeared. In a place like the desert, all kinds of footprints would disappear without a trace with a slight breeze. The footprints that Gohan saw were very clear, which meant that the owner of the footprints had not been here for long. As expected, following the footprints, Gohan saw a group of humans walking forward with their heads lowered. Their bodies were almost completely naked, with only a few rags wrapped around the important parts of their lower bodies. According to common sense, people living in the desert had to wrap their bodies tightly. Even if the temperature outside was 40 degrees Celsius, they still had to do so. This sounded a little unbelievable. Shouldn't people not wear clothes when it was hot? Why did they have to wrap themselves up? Wasn't this contradictory? The person who asked this question must have not been exposed to the sun for a long time. Human skin could not be exposed to the sun for long periods of time. Once exposed to the sun for too long, the skin would dry out and shrink, increase wrinkles, decrease elasticity, dilate capillaries, pigmentation, white atrophic spots, rhomboid skin, actinic granulomas, and star-like spontaneous scars. Otherwise, why would people who basked in the sun on the beach have to rub sunscreen on their bodies? In a place like the desert where the sun was hot every day, if they didn't cover their skin, they basically wouldn't live past the age of 10. Their tender skin would dry up and crack, and finally their whole body would fester and die. However, the desert that Gohan was in was different. This was not a normal desert, but a desert that was formed by magic. In a place like Suzhou where it was constantly raining, how could it be exposed to the sun for a long period of time? Therefore, these survivors didn't have to worry about the problem of their skin. Fortunately, the gods of the Egyptian pantheon only completed half of the magic transformation. They only changed the land into a desert, but they didn't have time to change the surrounding climate. Once the transformation was completed, this place would not be suitable for humans to live in. Because these humans couldn't find cloth at all, the surrounding areas that weren't part of the desert were all Yuanli, and the few oases in the desert were also used to grow food. There was no place for people to grow flax. Hello! Gohan quickly caught up to the group of walking survivors. These survivors looked at Gohan and Etion with envy and suspicion. They were envious because Gohan was wearing a full set of clothes, shoes, and hat. This was what they had dreamed of in their lives. What they were puzzled about was why Gohan and Etion would appear here. This group of survivors had about a dozen people. Among them, there were a few brave, young, and strong fellows who couldn't help but lick their tongues. The clothes of these two humans that appeared out of nowhere were too beautiful. If they could take them off and wear them, how good would that be? And that woman, she was really too beautiful. Compared to her, the other women in the tribe seemed to have been dried out. They were practically no different from dried beans. "Little bastards, lower your heads! Lower your heads!" The middle-aged man who was leading the group fiercely scolded the few youths who had bad intentions. He was a knowledgeable person, and knew that there were still sword-bearers in this world. When he was young, he was fortunate enough to talk to a sword-bearer. At first glance, he felt that Gohan was like a sword-bearer, because other than sword-bearers, no one could live so comfortably. Moreover, he even had a beautiful woman following behind him. This was the treatment that only sword-bearers could enjoy. Chapter 298. The team that Gohan met belonged to a small survival team called the Zongzi tribe. According to the team leader, the ancestor of the Zongzi tribe was a Zongzi dealer. Before the apocalypse, it just happened to be a few days before the Dragon Boat Festival. This dealer had hoarded hundreds of tons of frozen Zongzi in his warehouse, intending to make a fortune. After the apocalypse, this dealer, who liked to read web novels, decisively used the welding equipment in his warehouse to weld the entire warehouse shut, leaving only a small, concealed entrance. After a few days, this dealer seemed to have wandered around the area, and found 4 or 5 starving girls between the ages of 10 and 14. He then brought these 13-14-year-old girls into the warehouse, and lived a happy harem life with them. From a certain point of view, this Zongzi dealer was a character with a harem template. Until he died of cancer 5 years later, his warehouse had never been visited by Yuan Ko. Even after he died, he still hadn't finished eating his Zongzi. He spent a few months digging a cellar under the ground of his warehouse, and then moved all the ice and Zongzi from the freezer into the cellar. This way, his Zongzi could be kept frozen for a few years. This dealer died, but his harem survived, and even gave birth to a few children for him. This was the embryonic form of the Zongzi tribe. After a series of events, the Zongzi tribe finally developed into a small tribe with hundreds of people and blood relations. In the entire Suzhou Desert, it could be considered a tribe with a small reputation. The team that Gohan met was the team in charge of collecting water from the Zongzi tribe. The Zongzi tribe had recently lost a battle with another tribe, and the oasis that they relied on for survival had also been taken away by that tribe. The most important thing in the desert was water. Without the help of the oasis, the Zongzi tribe had to send out a team of adventurers and take great risks to obtain water from other areas in Suzhou that hadn't been desertified. Gohan's quest target, I Ching, was in this Zongzi tribe. However, he wasn't in this team of adventurers, so Gohan could only follow this team to the temporary stronghold of the Zongzi tribe. On the way to the base, the leader of the adventurer team, the middle-aged man known as Brother Long, had been trying his best to please Gohan and Tian. He even wanted to give Gohan a very precious alpine candy wrapped in a golden package. In this era, any candy was incomparably delicious, even if it had been around for more than 200 years. Of course, Gohan wasn't interested in a candy like that. Brother Long was a little embarrassed that he didn't give the candy away. However, he kept trying to talk to Gohan and tell him about the tragedy of his tribe. This also made Gohan understand why Brother Long was trying his best to please Gohan. It was because Brother Long hoped that Gohan could help the Zongzi tribe reclaim their oasis. Without the oasis, not only did it mean that they would lose their water source, it also meant that they would lose their source of food. This meant that the Zongzi tribe, who had been relying on their food reserves to survive, would soon run out of food and ammunition. However, apart from this Brother Long who was trying to curry favor with Gohan and the others after discovering their identity as sword-bearers, the rest of the youths were glaring at Gohan with anger. They didn't have a single shred of respect for Gohan. On the contrary, their eyes were filled with rage, as though Gohan was their father's murderer. However, this was the first time that Gohan had met them, and there wasn't any past grudges between them. It seemed like the hatred in their eyes had something to do with Gohan's identity as a sword-bearer. For these survivors to actually hate a sword-bearer who could protect their lives, this was an extremely interesting matter. After following the adventurer team for 10 minutes, Gohan finally arrived at a few buildings that were completely covered in sand. These buildings should have been built by the residents of the nearby villages before the Great Calamity. Because these buildings were built by the residents themselves, they were relatively sturdy. Even after being exposed to the elements for over 200 years and being buried by the desert, they still stood firm on the ground. These few buildings became the temporary stronghold of the Zongzi tribe, and could barely provide shelter for the Zongzi tribe in the desert. Outside these buildings, there was a simple wall made of sand. At the few exits of the wall, there were a few middle-aged men wielding guns standing guard. These guns weren't used to deal with Yuan Ko, because ordinary guns were completely useless against Yuan Ko. These guns were used to deal with humans. The human survivors in the desert weren't friendly towards each other, and fighting for survival resources was a common occurrence. In the desert, humans were the most dangerous creatures. Just like the tribe that had previously robbed the Zongzi tribe of their oasis. It was probably because of the deterrence of these guns that the other tribe didn't dare to completely annihilate the Zongzi tribe. Otherwise, robbing the Zongzi tribe of all their food would be in line with their fundamental interests. After entering the Zongzi tribe's temporary encampment, he discovered that most of the people were lazily lying on the ground, without any desire to move. Their faces didn't have the slightest bit of liveliness that a living person should have, as if they were waiting for death. "Hey Gohan, why are they all like this?" Seeing this scene, Etion asked in confusion. "They've probably lost all hope of surviving. In this desert, an oasis is a necessary territory for every tribe to survive. Once they lose their oasis, they'll lose their arable land, and without land, they won't have any food. This kind of tribe will either be swallowed up by other tribes or wait for death," Gohan explained. Actually, Gohan didn't know much about this dungeon, unlike the King Arthur's Betrayal dungeon where he had collected a few days' worth of information beforehand. Gohan had only read a few posts about this dungeon, and had a general understanding of the main storyline of the dungeon. The words that he had said to Etion just now were mostly what Gohan had analyzed based on the information he had obtained from Brother Long's conversation. After the adventurer team entered the outpost, they split up. Brother Long arranged for Gohan to wait in the ruins of a dilapidated building for a while, before bringing Gohan to the second floor of a building. There was a white-haired old man waiting. In the entire tribe, this old man had the most clothes on him, and there were all sorts of strange items from before the apocalypse hanging on his clothes. From this, it could be determined that this old man was the Zongzi tribe's elder or chief. "This little old man is Iyun. I wonder how I should address the two esteemed lords?" The old man called Iyun spoke with a trembling voice, as if he was cowering. Furthermore, after saying those words, he planned on kneeling down to greet Gohan. This was not the bearing that a chief of a tribe should have. It was unknown if he was scared out of his wits, or if he was pretending to be pitiful. "Old chief, there's no need to be so courteous. My name is Military Governor, and I'm a sword wielder. She is my sword maiden, Etion." The moment Gohan released his sword chi, Iyun, who was about to kneel down, realized that his knees seemed to be held up by a powerful force, preventing him from kneeling down. My apologies, my apologies." Old man Iyun no longer attempted to kneel down. Instead, he turned around and pushed aside a pile of sand behind him. He took out a large plastic bucket from within, and laboriously brought it in front of Gohan. Iyun opened the plastic bucket, and inside it was a bucket of flour. It was not even half the bucket's capacity. Iyun looked pitiful as he said with a face full of worry, "Lord, our tribe has nothing else to show our filial respect to you. This is our last bit of rations, please accept it." "This is your last bit of rations? With so many of you, this amount of flour probably won't even last 2 days." Etion could not help but say after seeing such a small amount of flour. More than that, more than that. If we eat sparingly, we can eat for a week. Iyun smiled dryly. To feed 100 people for a week with such a small amount of flour, each person probably wouldn't even have enough for 5 pitiful bottle cap. Then, since you only have such a small amount of flour, why do you still want to give it to us? Etion asked curiously. This old man's tribe is doomed. Instead of wasting such precious rations on this old man's tribe, why don't we hand it over to the few sword wielders? Why don't we hand it over to the sword bearers? Once the sword bearers have their fill, they will have the strength to kill a few more Yuanin. That way, my Zongzi tribe can die without regret. When Iyun said that, his expression was one of self-sacrifice and righteousness. At this moment, Etion was moved. She closed the bucket and returned it to Iyun's hands. Then, she took out a large pile of bread, beer, beef jerky, rice pancakes, puffed foods and various other food from her scabbard. Etion had probably taken out all the food from her scabbard, forming a small mountain. It was probably enough to feed the Zongzi tribe for a few weeks. Gohan was also extremely surprised at this. He knew that Etion's scabbard contained a lot of food, but he never expected that the scabbard contained so much food. This was actually the collection of the previous Etion's consciousness fragment. If not, Etion would not have had the time to gather so much food. Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you, Your Excellency. When the old man saw so much food, he immediately knelt down in front of Etion. He hugged Etion's calf and cried out his thanks. This made Etion feel a deep sense of pride. When Gohan and Etion came out of Iyun's room, Etion was still feeling good, thinking that she had done a great deed. However, when Etion occasionally glanced at Gohan, she realized that Gohan's face was filled with a mocking smile. Hey, ugly freak, are you mocking me? Etion's senses were extremely sensitive, so she immediately questioned Gohan. No. Gohan shook his head very straightforwardly. I don't dare mock you. Etion was not stupid. She raised her eyebrows and was about to flare up at Gohan. But at this moment, a little kid suddenly flashed past Etion and Gohan. Before he left, he even said a very disdainful sentence, "Idiot sword lady." As such, Etion stayed in her original spot, motionless. What's the matter? You are even angry at a child? Gohan asked curiously. No, I just feel like I met someone familiar. Etion's words were somewhat baffling. Chapter 299. Did you see someone you know? Gohan wasn't surprised, as if he had already guessed Etion's expression. I'm not sure. Etion shook her head. Then let's go look for him. Maybe he really is someone you know. Gohan's smile hid something interesting. No. Etion, who had always been carefree and unrestrained, was actually afraid. She took a step back, indicating that she didn't want to look for this person. Don't you want to complete the dungeon quest? Let's go and complete the quest. Alright, as you wish. We'll go and complete the quest now. Hearing Gohan's words, Etion let out a deep sigh of relief. When Gohan brought her around the temporary hideout for a while, they finally arrived at a low hut. Etion was a little angry. She found out that she had been deceived by Gohan. She angrily pointed at a skinny boy in the hut and questioned Gohan. Didn't we say that we're going to complete the quest and not look for someone we know? That's right, we're going to complete the quest. Gohan shrugged his shoulders. This is our quest objective. You too, is it fun to stop in front of someone else's house and point fingers? An angry little face emerged from the small hut. It was a little guy whose entire body was pitch black. His face and body were pitch black, as if he had just crawled out of a pile of briquettes. However, unlike those of his race who didn't mind exposing their private parts, this little guy was actually wearing a tight set of clothes. Well, maybe it couldn't even be considered a set of clothes. At most, it was just countless pieces of cloth wrapped together. Little guy, we want to ask you about something. I don't know if you can help us. Gu-han gave this young man a brilliant smile. This kind of smile was rarely seen. At the very least, those who were familiar with Gu-han had never seen this kind of smile before. I don't know anything. Don't ask me. The boy turned around and planned to ignore these two strange guys. However, Gu-han took out a bag of bread from his dimensional pocket and tore open the packaging. An alluring fragrance wafted out of the bag and floated into the boy's nose. The boy's head that had already turned around couldn't help but turn back. Are you planning to use this bread to exchange for my information? The boy took the initiative to ask before Gu-han could speak. You're very smart. Gu-han nodded. This child could do it, it saved him the trouble of explaining. Okay, I'll tell you. The boy directly snatched the bread from Gu-han's hand and stuffed it into his mouth. After swallowing and wiping his mouth clean, he added, If you want to ask me if I don't know, then don't blame me. My goodness, who knows if you really don't know the information? If you don't want to answer, then it'll be over. Gu-han would have wasted a piece of bread. No, I think you definitely know what I want to ask. Gu-han didn't care about the boy's petty tricks. Let me ask you, there's a boy called I-Ching in this tribe. Where is he? I-Ching. Hearing this name, I-Tian, who was behind Gu-han, trembled. Obviously, this name poked at a certain place in I-Tian's heart. I-Ching? You're looking for I-Ching? The boy's face showed a trace of surprise. Why are you looking for a dead person? He died 5 or 6 years ago. He starved to death. Sigh, a child without parents is really pitiful. He starved to death, and no one was willing to bury him. Okay, I've answered your questions. You can leave now. I still want to take an afternoon nap. After answering Gu-han's question, the boy planned to chase them away. However, even a fool could guess that the boy's answer was a lie. If I-Ching was really dead, then this dungeon quest would be useless. I-Ching, we haven't seen each other for so many years, but you're still like this. As expected, people don't change. I-Tian, who was standing behind Gu-han, suddenly began to laugh coldly. She looked at the boy in front of her coldly. I didn't think that I would have the chance to see you again. I-Ching, it's been more than 700 years since we last met. More than 700 years. I-Ching, who was full of nonsense, began to feel a little confused. He had only lived for more than 10 years. How could he have a friend that he hadn't seen for more than 700 years? Calm down, I-Tian. This is a game. Gu-han patted I-Tian's shoulder and said to I-Tian through the sword mark. This is a dungeon in a game. Everything you see is illusory data. This is not the real I-Ching. It's just a bunch of data. I-Tian didn't say anything. She also came to her senses. She silently lowered her head, and directly entered the small house through the door. I-Ching wanted to stop I-Tian, but how could he, who was so skinny and weak, stop I-Tian, who was a sword mother? So, he was directly pushed to the ground and fell. Gu-han laughed. He helped I-Ching up from the ground and entered the small house. Who are you people? What do you want? Don't you know that trespassing will result in death? I-Ching was very angry. These two people were really too strange and didn't follow the rules. I'm sure you can guess who we are. As for the crime of trespassing, do you think there are police here? Fine, you're a sword wielder. You're awesome, you're amazing. You guys stay here. I'll leave. I-Ching picked up some things on the ground and was about to leave these awesome sword wielder. You ate my food and gave me fake information. How are we going to settle this? Gu-han pulled I-Ching back with his sword chi. I-Ching couldn't take another step forward. Even though his face was red, he still couldn't move. Fine, you guys are amazing. I admit it. I-Ching wasn't someone who didn't know how to be flexible. Seeing that he couldn't escape from Gu-han's clutches, he just sat on the ground and looked like he had been played to death. That's right. I'm I-Ching. Tell me, why are you looking for me? I Ching stared at Gohan and Tian provocatively. But I'm very hungry right now. I'm going to starve to death soon. You guys better give me something to eat. Otherwise, I won't answer a single word. Sure, it's a fair deal. Gohan threw another piece of bread to I Ching. I Ching hurriedly tore off the wrapping paper and took a big bite. You guys should be from Yanjing City, right? But we're indeed from Yanjing City. How did you know? Gohan asked with a smile. Isn't that simple? Who would be so extravagant as to wrap their bread in a transparent plastic bag? Only people from Yanjing City would have the time to do that. Speaking up to here, I Ching's face revealed a trace of yearning. Actually, even if you guys don't say it, I can guess why you guys are looking for me. Were you guys sent by him to pick me up? Him? Gohan shook his head. I don't know what you mean. Gohan really didn't know what I Ching was talking about. As mentioned before, Gohan only knew some of the main storyline of this dungeon. As for the specific plot and the various story backgrounds and details, Gohan didn't know. Stop pretending. You guys were sent by him, I Ching sneered. Otherwise, who in the entire Yanjing City would care about the life and death of a beast like me? It must have been hard on him. It's been more than 10 years, yet he still remembers me. Gohan didn't say anything because he didn't know what I Ching was talking about. However, I Ching, who had opened his mouth, began to talk nonstop. It was probably because he thought that Gohan knew what he was talking about. That person thinks that if he remembers me now and picks me up, I'll be grateful to him and call him my dear daddy. From the moment he left me and my mother here, I've cut off all ties with him. From now on, I Ching am I Ching, a pawn of the Zongzi tribe. I'm not the descendant of Ida, the great sword bearer. I've already sworn to the heavens that from now on, Ida and I will be separated by blood. Go back and tell him that unless he wants to see my dead body, don't disturb my life. I Ching had mistaken Gohan for his father's subordinate who was here to pick him up. Listening to the things inside, I Ching's father was also a sword bearer. This was a little interesting. Why would a sword bearer from Yanjing City have a biological son in the Suzhou Desert thousands of miles away? Whether you believe it or not, we're not sent by your father to pick you up. Gohan shook his head. Due to some special reasons, we have to find you and protect you until the upcoming danger is over. I Ching, who had tears in his eyes, raised his head and looked at Gohan hesitantly. You guys really aren't sent by Ida to pick me up? Of course not. Unless the Ida you're talking about is a sword bearer at spirit sword level or above, he wouldn't be able to command a sword bearer like me. Furthermore, we don't plan to bring you back. If we really wanted to do that, we could just knock you out. There's no need to waste so much effort talking to you. You're a smart kid, you should know that I'm not lying. Then why are you looking for me? I Ching couldn't understand. Also, you said you're going to protect me and protect me through some danger. What the hell is this? How do you know what danger I'm going to face? And why do you want to protect a trash like me? Let me correct you. You're not trash. Your future is beyond your imagination. Because of the future you, we have to protect the present you. Do you understand? Gohan spoke in a roundabout way. A normal person wouldn't understand. I understand now. I Ching nodded his head forcefully. Do you have some sort of foresight skill? Do you know that the future me is stronger than you can imagine, so you want to protect the present me who is weaker than you can imagine? Oh, maybe you guys don't have any foresight skill, but humans who came here from the future. Nowadays, there are Yuan-Kos from the past everywhere, so it's not strange for a few sword-bearers from the future to appear. Hearing I Ching's self-analysis, Gohan couldn't help but feel a little stunned. Is it strange? Tian, who was silently watching everything, sneered. He's one of the most powerful Jiandis, the founder of Yuzhong City, Zhetian Jiandi. His wisdom has always surpassed you mortals. This I Ching was actually the young Zhetian Jiandi, the first sword-bearer of Heavenly Sword. Chapter 300. Yes, this disheveled and rebellious young man, named I Ching, was the future founder of China's second headquarters city, Yuzhong City, where Gohan grew up, Zhejiandi. The instant's dungeon's name was Heroes Rise from Humble Beginnings. It referred to the fact that before the heaven-shrouding Sword Emperor became a sword wielder, he was just a youth in a desert tribe who didn't have enough to eat. Looking at the legend of Zhejiandi's life, he was a main character even more than Gohan. In I Ching's era, Zhejiandi was the main character without a doubt. This also explained why I Ching looked familiar. After all, he was her first swordsman. Although a girl changed 18 times between childhood and womanhood, the outline of her face when she was young was still very clear. However, what made Gohan curious was the relationship between I Ching and Zhejiandi. Gohan noticed that I Ching's attitude towards I Ching was not good. It was as if there was some kind of grudge between the two. It seemed that the history books and various legends said that I Ching was Zhejiandi's best friend was not trustworthy. There must be some unspeakable story between the two. Although I feel that what I just said sounded like a fantasy, there is one thing I can be sure of. You don't have any bad intentions towards me. Let me reintroduce myself. My name is I Ching. Although I don't know how much longer I can stay with you, I hope to be friends with you. Young I Ching was worthy of being the future Jiandi. Although he was facing a swordsman who was many times stronger than him, he was neither arrogant nor servile. He took the initiative to ask Gohan to be friends. With this kind of attitude, even if I Ching did not have Jiandi's talent, he would definitely be a person who could not be underestimated in the future. Okay, I Ching, we are friends now. Gohan held I Ching's hand and shook it hard. System notification. Quest 1, Skinny Youth, completed. You have found I Ching and become friends with him. System notification. Main quest has been updated. Quest 2. Find the White Iron Sword. There is a lost ancient sword Maiden White Iron Sword hidden near this temporary base. Please help I Ching find the White Iron Sword. A new quest had been issued. It was to help I Ching find Bai Taijian. Who would have thought that the great Jiandi of the first generation would have an ancient sword maiden, the White Iron Sword, one of the 3 beginner sword maidens. It was a piece of beginner equipment that could be given away with a single click. However, it was worth mentioning that I Ching's White Iron Sword was not a man-made White Iron Sword, but a natural sword maiden White Iron Sword. In the ancient sword record, it was ranked around 300. Compared to the thousands of rankings, this was already a pretty good ranking. I Ching, time to eat. At this time, a man who only covered his most important parts came to I Ching's door, but he was shocked to find that I Ching was sitting with Gohan and I Tian. Seeing Gohan and I Tian, this person was clearly a little dumbfounded. The news about Gohan and I Tian had already spread throughout the tribe. Everyone knew that a powerful sword wielder had entered their tribe. However, they never expected that this sword wielder would actually be together with the stubborn and dirty I Ching. Uncle I Tian, what are you spacing out for? Give me my food. I Ching urged when he saw I Tian standing at the door in a daze. Oh, here you go. Only then did I Tian hand over the 2 slightly charred scones from the basket to I Ching's hands. Seeing these 2 scones, I Ching said in shock, Uncle I Tian, did the chief confer a title? He actually gave me 2 scones. How can you say that? How can you say that the chief has gone crazy? Do you think that giving you 1 more scone is a bad thing? These past few days, we haven't even eaten our fill. I Tian said unhappily. No, Uncle I Tian, our Zhongzi tribe is in the most difficult time right now. We should try our best to save food in order to be able to survive this period. How can we be so extravagant as to eat 2 scones? Uncle I Tian, I'll give you another one. You go and persuade the chief not to be so extravagant. I Ching said sincerely. You're crazy. If you don't want to eat, then leave. Etienne snatched the scone from I Ching's hands and left angrily. Seeing this, I Ching knew that what he said earlier was for nothing. He could only sigh, turn around, sit down, and silently nibble on the scones in his hands. I couldn't tell that you're so considerate of the tribe. Gohan smiled. I lost my parents when I was 4. If it wasn't for the kindness of the tribe that brought me up, I would have died in this desert a long time ago. It was the tribe that saved my life, and I Ching, must repay the kindness. Therefore, even if he came to take me to Yanjing City to enjoy a comfortable life, I would never leave the tribe. I Ching will live and die with the tribe. As long as I Ching am here, the tribe will be here. I Ching bit half of the scone and carefully hid the other half in his clothes. He had just eaten 2 pieces of bread from Gohan, and this time he only ate half of the scone, so he didn't feel hungry. Drink some water. Gohan handed a bottle of water to I Ching. I Ching was stunned for a moment and thanked him. He unscrewed the bottle cap and drank all the water in one gulp. Then, like the half of the scone, he carefully kept the empty bottle. The most important thing in the desert is the container for water. This bottle is much more valuable than the water. I Ching explained. I Ching, since we're friends now, can I ask what's going on between you and your father, that him? If he's really your father, and you're worried about the survival of the tribe, I can ask him to help you when I return to Yanjing City. No, absolutely don't go to him. I Ching's reaction was very strong. I don't want to meet that ungrateful, cruel and heartless person again, and I will never accept his help. What's going on, I Ching? If you're my friend, then as a friend, I hope I can help you. Forget it, it's not a big deal to tell you. I Ching sneered. My father, the man called Ida, was the same as me. He lost his parents when he was young, and was brought up by the tribe as an orphan. In the end, not only did the chief not look down on my father, but he also married his own daughter to him, and later he had me. In the end, when I was 1 year old, he found a sword from God knows where, and became the sword bearer, becoming the most powerful person in the tribe. So the chief passed the position to my father, and let him lead the tribe forward. At first it was quite good, because there was only one sword bearer in the desert, and he was the most invincible human in the whole desert. All the tribes were afraid of our Zongzi tribe, and we once owned 3 oases, with a population of more than 400. We were the most powerful tribe in the desert. But later, 2 sword bearers from Yanjing City came, and we warmly welcomed them. In the end, they talked to my father for less than 10 minutes, and he decided to abandon our tribe, and go to Yanjing City to live a life of luxury. My mother and I were very happy at first, and thought that we could go to Yanjing City with my father to live a happy life. But that night, the man left without saying goodbye with the sword bearers from Yanjing City, and left my mother and me alone in this yellow desert. He didn't even give us an explanation. So my mother and I lost our father, and the tribe lost a powerful chief. The surrounding tribes that were afraid of us joined forces after hearing the news, and launched attacks against us again and again. Until now, our Zongzi tribe has lost all of our oases, and more than 300 of our tribesmen died in more than 10 years of fighting. If we still can't find an oasis to live on, our Zongzi tribe will completely disappear. In the end, the first month after my father left, my mother went crazy because she couldn't accept the truth. Then, she ran into the desert alone, and we couldn't find any trace of her anymore. So I became an orphan. Fortunately, the tribesmen didn't vent their anger on me because of my father's departure, and instead raised me. So since I was young, I made up my mind that in this life, I would never want to acknowledge that cruel man, and that I would forever be with the tribe, through life and death, and through trials and tribulations. At first, I thought you were sent by my father to bring me to Yanjing City, because my mother told me that after he gave birth to me, he heard his thing, and that it would be impossible for him to have a second child. So I thought he wanted to continue his bloodline, and wanted to bring me back. I'm sorry I've wronged you. At this point, I Ching's childhood story came to an end. This story couldn't be considered a soul-stirring, twists and turns, or thrilling story. It was just a very simple story of abandoning a wife. Such stories happened all the time, from ancient times to the present. There were endless examples. In ancient times there was Chun Shimi, and now there was a certain great ancestor. They were all typical people who abandoned their wives for the sake of their careers when they were young. Gohan listened very seriously to the story. Gohan didn't know that Jitian Jiendi had such an experience when he was young. Itian also listened very seriously. It seemed that when she was with I Ching in the past, she had never heard I Ching talk about his own past. I can guess the reason why that man didn't bring you and your mother, Gohan suddenly said. What reason? I Ching's voice was a little emotional. This was the biggest knot in his heart, and it was difficult for him to let go of it every time. It's very simple. We went through many difficulties and dangers on the way here from Yanjing City. Halfway through, there was a fellow sword-bearer who left us forever. Gohan's face showed a sad expression, completely unable to tell that this was something he made up. Even if it was a sword-bearer, going all the way back to Yanjing City from here was a matter of 9 out of 10 chances of survival. If your father brought you and your mother, I'm afraid that 9 out of 10 chances of survival would be 10 out of 10. I don't want to argue for your father because I don't know him, but I just want to tell you this possibility. Your father might not want you and your mother to die on the way to Yanjing City, so he left without saying a word. He might not be as heartless as you think. If that's the case, then he could totally not have left, right? Wouldn't it have been better to stay here and protect the tribe that raised him? Why did he have to go to that damn Yanjing City? I Ching's emotions were about to explode. Because no sword-bearer can resist the temptation of Yanjing City. Gohan curled his lips. To be precise, it's because he can't resist the temptation of improving his own abilities. Only by going to Yanjing City can your father possibly improve his strength. From this point of view, your father really owes you. So that's how it is. I Ching sat back down on the ground. The question that had been buried in his heart for a long time was finally solved. After listening to Gohan's explanation, I Ching felt that his hatred towards his father had lessened a little. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.